Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 6th episode of the Branch Out podcast. We're your hosts, Vince and Emmanuel.
Yes, and today we have with us, 5 guests, but from 4 different locations. We've got Marc from Switzerland, we've got Maksym and
Alina.
What was it?
Alina.
And Darya. Oh, sorry, Maksym and Alina, you are from
Right.
Czech Republic, right? Yes. And Darya, you are Ukrainian, but at the moment living in Switzerland.
Yes.
And we have Arthur from Canada. So maybe if each of you wants to quickly give an introduction, who you are and what's awesome about you. Marc, go.
It starts with me. All right. Who I am? I'm a guy who, let's say, has a background in the field of international relations. I'm extremely interested in conflict matters, both conflict and deconfliction. I was able to participate last time, so I guess some people maybe already saw me or heard my ideas, and I'm eager to see what comes out of tonight as well.
Cool. Maksym, Alina?
Hello, my name is Alina. I'm 24 years old, and I was born in Ukraine and grew up also there in the city Sumy, and the city is located near the border with Russia. After school, I went to study psychology in Poland, and then I moved to Czech Republic, and now study tourism in University of Prague.
Okay.
So I have almost the same story because we're from one city. We also together studied in Poland and together moved to Prague. So not much to say. But like we're both from Ukraine. We lived a little bit in some countries and now we're in Prague.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, so hi,
Darya.
I'm Darya. I'm almost 24 years old. I was also born in Ukraine, Sumy. I raised up with Alina, my sister, to 7 years in Ukraine in Sumy, and then I moved in Switzerland, go here in school, and now I'm working as a dental assistant at the moment, yes.
Mm-hmm. Arthur.
My name's Arthur. I have a background in history, and and editing a political publication as well. And what is awesome? What's awesome?
What isn't awesome?
I probably have a huge share of the reason that coffee prices continue to increase in the world. So I don't know if that's awesome or weird, but
Leave some for the rest of us.
yeah.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. It's great to see how much difference there is between everyone here. I think that should make for an interesting conversation.
What do we do?
What do we do?
Who are we and what do we do?
Yeah, we should do that, shouldn't we? Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm Vince. I'm 23 years old, and we started this podcast together to help promote open and positive discussions. What do? I just finished my apprenticeship as a mediamatiker, as a mediamatician. Yeah.
And I do stuff with computers. I'm a system administrator, and I'm too old to bother with my age, so yeah. Well, today we do have sort of the sequel, part 2 of the last show that we did. I don't know, well, Marc was present, Darya and Maksym and Alina. I don't know if you watched any of that episode, so maybe you have a little idea of what we've already talked about, maybe not. No? Okay, so we're going into
no
this
spoilers.
And Arthur, I don't know if you had a chance. It was no, okay. It was a marathon view, so definitely we pretty much broached I think, I don't want to say most, because it doesn't feel like we talked about most of the things that have to do with the conflict. But it feels for some reason like we did a lot of talking. So almost 3 hours, was it?
Yeah, we almost got to 3 hours.
Okay.
Yeah, and at the end, I don't even think that we even really got into depth on much of the conflict. We did talk quite a bit about a few things, but there's so many angles you can go at this from. So it's good that we have another opportunity here. Got another couple hours.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we had that we wanted to talk about, which we didn't get a chance to, was what brought about this particular instance of conflict. That was one of the things that we didn't get. We sort of touched on it when we were talking about NATO, and the sort of historical development of NATO moving further and further east. But we didn't get into the whole other topic regarding the sort of the Donbas region and what's been happening there over the last 8 or so years.
Yeah.
But maybe before we go straight into that, I'd be interested to know just an overview from Darya and from our friends there in the Czech Republic, sort of what their initial reaction, responses, emotions, feelings were regarding the initial invasion of Russia about a week. What is it, 7 days now? 8 days?
I believe so.
11.
11.
Yeah.
Okay. 11 days ago. So whichever one of you wants to start, just go for it. Or not.
I don't know, Maksym, you want to say something about this? I don't know. I don't know what to say. Emotions are when it started, then yes, I've got a call from my uncle. And he said it's war. My emotions was like, I was really shocked. I asked him, where are you? Are you safe? Is everything good with you? He said yes. I asked who started the war, and he answered me Russia. That was the second shock. So yes. Maybe I say this in German, Vince, just quickly. Also, ich bin eben noch schockiert von dem, dass es überhaupt passiert ist, dass wir uns verstehen.
So she's still shocked that it happened in the first place. Yeah, so your uncle is living in Ukraine, right? Is he still there?
Yes, he's still there.
And so you heard it from him before even hearing about it, like most of us on the news and on social media.
Maybe, yeah. I heard it from him at the first time, not from the media.
What about you guys, Maksym and Alina? How did you?
Like truly speaking, as for me, I wasn't my shock level wasn't extremely high because even before New Year, somewhere deep in our minds, like all the things were going on, and we had an idea that this is someone like somehow it was going to happen. So like we just didn't know when. So when you wake up 4 in the morning and your mom says, "Kids, I think the war started." I think it's I don't know. I think I'll remember like this exact call for the rest of my life. So, I don't know like how to explain my emotions this moment. And my parents called me. They said, "Please, Alina, call your parents." They didn't answer for about, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes because they didn't. Because that night, almost everyone was on the phone, calling their relatives, colleagues, and so on. So Alina just couldn't call them, and she was shocked. I don't know. She might say what she felt.
Yes, I understand. Would begin, and when his parents called us, I understand. Okay, this call, I know. I just had a look on him and understood that okay, the war has started, and I also was in shock, but I'm waiting for it. I also cried for 1 hour, I think, and then I put it together, and in the evening we went on the demonstration. It was the first day, and after this demonstration, all of our friends from Ukraine come in our house, and we always, I think, maybe every minute checks the news. And for 4 days, day by day, we gather it in our house. Yes, discuss this news, and also asking each other how is your parents, where they are, something like that.
To be clear, because our native town, Sumy, where my parents live and her parents lived, it's located just 2 hours north from Kharkov, where a lot of things happening right now, and half an hour from the Russian border. So, like, we didn't know, like, parents told that all over Ukraine, bombs falling on the airports and so on, but we didn't know what will be, like, the next move. So, we were scared.
Yes, but now situation in Sumy is also really scary because, for example, 20 minutes before this podcast, I had known that the boyfriend of my classmate was killed in his car during he go from the city center to home.
Was killed? Did you say killed?
Yeah, because the whole Sumy town now it's surrounded. All the roads almost closed, and there are no like green ways for humanitarian help. But some, like for example, my neighbors on my street or my friends, they were trying to escape the city because something is going to happen soon, maybe tomorrow or this night and so on, because the whole city is surrounded. And all my neighbors, they tried to move. Someone like did return back when they saw these checkpoints and so on. So like, and her classmate's boyfriend, he also wanted to go out from a city, and he like faced the checkpoint. So
yeah, crazy. Wow. Arthur, where were you? What did you think when you first heard this news? Do you remember?
I do. Yeah, I was well, obviously surprised. It's not something that you commonly hear about, at least not in Europe. And the first thing that came to my mind was, what a stupid thing to do. Why would they do something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that there's been a sort of buildup on this side of the world talking about it, and but then at the same time, it's difficult to know when it comes to the media on this side of the world, or even intelligence agencies on this side of the world, and what they say, because they're wrong so often, or they're lying so often, that you're just like,
Mm-hmm.
when it actually happened, it was a bit of a shock. Yeah, it's incredible. And very sad. I'm sorry to hear that, and I'm sorry for your families for sure. That's I can't even imagine.
Right. Darya, you said something interesting, or something that spoke to me as curious. You said that was it your uncle who called you?
Yes.
Your uncle. When you asked him who started it, and he told you it was Russia, you said you were surprised.
Yes, I was. I was surprised, not because of the political situation there and that it happened off the politic stuff. I was more surprised that the nation Russia are shot it on us Ukrainians. In my head, it was just like, it looks like a brother killed a brother or shot to a brother. It's like this, yes.
So I mean, I'm looking here at the map. The city that you and your sister are from, your family is from, Sumy. This is in eastern Ukraine, right? This is right on the, like you said, it's very close to the border of Russia.
Yes.
And in that area of Ukraine, from what I've heard, there's a lot of people who, number one, speak Russian, and number two, sort of see themselves, like you just said now, sort of as brother or kin, like related to the Russians. Is that true?
Yeah, like almost the whole eastern part of Ukraine, they speak Russian. It's almost the same like the western part of Ukraine. They have mixed words with Polish, Hungarian, and so languages. So it's like common in every country when you live people living near the border. And yes, it's true. For example, on my father's line, all my relatives, like grandparents and so on, they live in Russia near Kursk. So I think that there are a lot of families who have relatives, parents, grandparents in Russia. And speaking, when you like also call them and say that this happened, they also were shocked, because like, if you know, on the 24th of February there was like the Putin, he declared that he thinks, like he says that DNR and LNR, they're independent republics. So in our mind we understood that it was going to happen, like as on the Russian side. So and so yes.
Okay. And something else, Maksym, that you said as well. You said that it wasn't surprising to you. It was not if, but when. Can you explain why that would have been?
Because I don't know how it was like in your countries, but even before New Year, before a New Year in December, October, November, there were a lot of
news.
A lot of like news, or someone was just speculating. I don't know how to say it.
Speculating.
Like, yeah, for example, from Germany, there were newspapers. They were saying, "Oh, this is like a picture of Ukraine and how Russia are going to attack Ukraine." Or for example, when you see like these speeches from Russian government, you also like, you understand that it was going to happen, because after Crimea, after their speeches after about Donbass and so on, so we knew it will happen, but we just didn't want to believe in it.
Wow.
Do you mind if I ask a question?
Go ahead.
What were your guys' thoughts? Did you think that they would attack all of Ukraine, or do you think they would just move into the Donbass region and just hold that? Like, what?
Truly speaking, when like we saw this like plans, I'm sure it was just like minds, what could happen and so on. As you see, as you already saw, our city, it's like on a northeast, and Donbass is like more
Always
more south.
south.
So I thought, oh, my parents will be safe because like they just want to take Donbass and so on. So we don't have to care about, like, not care, but we don't have to be scared about that. But like, no, about the stuff what is happening right now, I think nobody thought it could happen like in this way.
Wow. And if you don't mind a follow-up in this, you don't have to answer this one, because I don't think anyone really has an answer to this one. But what do you think the actual end goal is? Do you think that Russia's trying to scoop up Ukraine once again, or is it what he said, where he just wants to demilitarize? What do you think the actual goal is?
Like, you have to be 100% sure that demilitarizing is just attacking buildings, maybe airports, which are like connected to the army. So, but when they, like, if you right now, I don't know if you can Google it, because maybe Google like just closes such kind of pictures. But in Telegram, where all our like friends and people are sending these pictures, what they see, and if you will try to find pictures of Kharkov city right now, it just you can just now Google the pictures of Syria.
Yeah,
Kharkov looks like this right now.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Wow.
That's something that we addressed quite in depth in the last episode. How so there is the actual reality that is occurring. It's sort of like the analogy of the tree falling in the forest, right? If nobody sees or hears the tree falling, does it really fall? Right? It's kind of this sort of thing. And yes, indeed, the tree does fall. There is a reality outside of what we can see and hear, and perceive with our senses. But the vast majority of the information that we have to make sense of the world around us is not information that we are firsthand experiencing with those five senses. And that is a bit of a problem when we have nothing else to rely on except the images, the voices, the text that someone else somewhere else is creating for us to absorb, and we have to essentially believe what is being written or shown in video or whatever form it is.
Yeah. That's definitely initially when this started, like Arthur said earlier, like you see what's happening on the mainstream media, and it is initially shocking, but at the same time there's also this sort of distrust that some of us have in the mainstream media. So you immediately start trying to think about, what is the goal here? Do they have one? Like, is what they're portraying actually correct? And so trying to make sense of this when the greatest source of information that most of us have is not necessarily a reliable one, just makes it all that much more difficult. And like when the most reliable accounts are first-hand accounts, right? So like Maksym, like you said, when you have Telegram groups where genuine citizens that are right there right now who are experiencing this can share their experiences, that to me I think is a really great resource for reliable information.
Right.
Yeah.
Marc, to bring you in here finally, over the last week since our last episode, what have you seen in the way of media? What is your impression of the way that the media are portraying what's happening over the last week?
I was gonna comment on that last comment by Vince, that that Telegram. I mean, we might say that first-hand accounts are the most reliable, but we still have to be aware that every single person has a bias towards something, which means that everyone decides where they point the camera, what they say. They might, it's very easy to claim, oh, this was a Russian bullet that killed the guy, but there's no way to know that. In war, it's sadly the case that that you have all sorts of parties doing all sorts of things that might not be rational, and you also have dumb things like friendly fire, which also happens. So yeah, I guess we need to keep that in mind. Everyone that's posting something is posting it for a reason with a certain intention, and we have to always be ready to question that. As far as the news, the past week, I found it's become very difficult to reach certain sites. That's for sure. to get news from certain sources. Tons has happened, and as we already have commented on that. I don't think. I mean, I don't know many people who have a true interest in the crisis who feel like they take the news at face value, or I mean, I'd use the word trust it, but I think trust is way too big a word for anyone to use in regards to the media and news. But if we were to judge by the news coverage, I guess that's all we can. It's kind of a reality which is preformed for us, and we have to kind of accept that we have to maneuver within that boundary, because we only have the parameters of what's being offered us as third parties. I'd say, yeah, well, a whole lot's going on, so I'm sure there's plenty to talk about in that department. But as far as the news in itself, I'd say that I noticed. So certain sites are getting near impossible to access, which means we are kind of being boxed into one very specific narrative, which has too many similarities with the last 2 years that we've been through, to not mention it. So I think it's the moment your eyes have the blinkers put on, I think it's necessary to start, start waving those red flags in your head and start questioning everything. Yeah.
I'd actually like to forward Emmanuel's question to the rest of you guys. What do you think about how the media has portrayed and reported on this? Darya,
do you understand the question?
Could you please
I don't
repeat?
understand it.
Okay.
I don't hear you.
Sorry,
Okay,
can you
can
hear
you
me fine
repeat?
here? Sure. What do you think about the way that the news and the media has reported on the war in Ukraine right now?
Just quick on German. Also, Vince, du hast mich gefragt, was ich davon halte, was so die Medien dazu beitragen oder so. Also meine Meinung.
Ja, voll. Also Staatsmedien so.
Okay. Wie sagt man enttäuscht auf Englisch?
Disappointed.
Thanks. Yes, I'm a little bit disappointed from the west side of the media, so I think, yes, because it's a lot of disinformation here in everywhere, in Russia, in Ukraine, in Europe, in America. You really have to search where do you can believe something. And you have to research your informations to be sure that it happens like this, and it makes I think it makes the situation a little bit more difficult, because we are a lot of people on this world, and everyone have another mening, say madam.
Yeah.
Opinion.
Another
opinion
or view.
Opinion, yes. And with a lot of disinformations, we have a lot of people who have false opinions, I think, yes.
Hmm.
And you think that's partly because of how the mainstream media is reporting on this?
Yes.
What about Maksym and Alina?
As for me, I don't check any European news because I always have this Ukrainian news in my phone, in Telegrams and Instagram, all over the on every application. But I agree with Darya that there are a lot of disinformation, and also admitted that yesterday I was in Wrocław in Poland, and I saw a newspaper, and there were a lot of information for people who comes from Ukraine here, and they wrote how to help, how the, also in Polish and in Ukrainian, how they can find the house or how they can earn money there without passports or without any other documents. I think it's very useful and helpful for people from another country who here and can speak English or another languages. But yes, but for example, for Russia, about Russia, there are a lot of fakes there, and our relatives from Russia called us and write to us that we need to be patient and waiting when they come to us and help us to survive and save us from neo-Nazis and from Bandera people. Bandera is like national symbol of independence of Ukraine.
Hmm.
Well, not independent. It's like national symbol of nationalism. In Ukraine.
Nationalism, yes,
Yeah.
but he tried to do Ukraine independent in the past. It's
Okay.
why now they think that they
Just
are.
like a quick question, a quick fact. I think last week in the schools, Putin started a lesson about Ukraine and Russia situation,
Hmm.
just for facts, and the lesson is going about the whole room of Russia in every school.
Okay.
Yes,
Interesting.
I don't know about that.
And today I saw the news that Russian news that they destroyed biological weapon
Hmm.
in Ukraine, and this weapon is only for Slavic people. Know that this weapon can kill only Slavic people.
Like maybe it will be hard for you to believe, but when you talk to your relatives, to the closest people of yours, and they say that you are not right, you are lying, and we will save you, you understand what level of propaganda they have there. I also don't check news like European news, Czech news at all, because I have groups, chats almost from every city in Ukraine, like big city, Sumy, Kharkov, Kiev, and so on, in WhatsApp, in Telegram, because nowadays in Russia, in Ukraine, Telegram became it has more, it's more popular than even Facebook, so we more use Telegram. When you see what people sending and making video for shooting themselves, so you don't have to check news, what are writing newspapers and so on. So I don't check news at all. And kind of strange situation about propaganda. My grandmother's brother, he lives in Russia, Ulan-Ude. It's you have middle of Russia and a little bit west, so far away. And when she sends him pictures, calls him, and speaks about the situation, what is going on, he doesn't believe. She didn't know what to do because it's her brother, and she started to send pictures of
prisoners from Russian.
When you take someone's soldier, how
A prisoner of war.
Yeah, prisoner. Yeah.
Yep.
She started to send videos with prisoners, Russian prisoners, and this cousin, she saw a man, and she recognized her neighbor's son.
Okay.
And when that woman saw this video and said, "Yes, this is my son," she didn't believe my grandmother at all. But when she saw this video, and he was saying his name, where is he from, what are the names and last names of his parents, she started to go through all the city and saying that people, this is true.
Okay.
Like to make you understand what kind of news they have there, because every situation when Russia kills or shoots something in Russia, they say that it's Ukraine doing this. Like all exactly opposite news.
Opposite, yeah, yeah. But so what I'm hearing is that you guys don't really look at the Western media very much.
Not at all.
Not at all. But do you ever, or is it just something you never pay any attention to? So what I'm getting at is, do you see stuff in the Western media that you can say, hey, this is not accurate, this is not true, because you have direct contact with people on Telegram, for example?
Mean that right now, during this situation, I don't check Western news at all, because I think only about what is going on there, and true speaking, right now, I care more, are my parents okay, than what West writes about this. So.
Okay.
Makes sense.
So you have a kind of a better quality, at least this is the way you think about it. The information that you are getting from Telegram via direct sources, we could say, that is a higher quality source of information than going to Western media websites, for example.
I think right now, yes.
Fair enough. Let me just show this as an example here. This is something I showed in the last episode as well. This is a comparison and there's lots of these kind of comparisons going around. Photographs that are being used in this conflict in this case, it's to show the Ukrainian president, Zelensky. And these photos are actually have nothing to do with the conflict itself, but they are being used in the conflict to say, this is Zelensky, this is where he is, he's with the troops in the trenches and so on. But in reality, these photos are taken from the previous year when he was just routinely, checking on the troops and so on. So this is one example of this kind of this insanity in the media that we cannot even believe what we are seeing with our own eyes in the media. Another example is this one. This is one that this is an image that a friend of mine on Facebook shared, and I had seen it on Twitter about 5 or 6 times already before that. And then when I saw my friend posting this on Facebook, I thought I have to actually look into this. So with a quick Google search, if I have it open here, I searched "poor old man holds kitten burnt house," and there's the photos. And if you go to all, immediately you see dates of, I don't know if you can see that, 2018. So exactly. So this is the actual story of this image. And let me scroll down here so you can see what people are writing about it. You'll see heartbreaking, makes my heart hurt, this shit show needs to end. And then the last one, Putin is the sorry, it's awful, I shouldn't be laughing. Putin is the most dangerous human in the world. Shameful. And this image is of this poor man in Turkey who accidentally burnt his house down by lighting his gas stove, and that's his kitten survived. So it's still a sad story, but
it is really sad.
Poor guy. He got sorted. The Turkish government helped him, and he should be okay.
I noticed that most of those like the collage that you showed there, that most of those images came from Twitter.
Yeah, but the thing is that the media today in the West feeds off Twitter.
Yeah.
It's insane how the media in the West, they they use Twitter as a source now, and that's crazy. Going over to Arthur, what do you think about the media's portrayal of this conflict?
Well, I think what you've shown kind of says it all, at least for our side, for the Western side of things. The last 2 years, like Marc mentioned, has so destroyed the faith of anyone who has any sort of independent thought, or even just the most basic ability to use logic. And maybe I'm being a little bit excessive there, but it's really destroyed any sort of faith in basically every one of our institutions. Like there's almost no institution in the West right now that if you're an objective person, you can take at their word.
Right.
Which is a shame. As far as this is concerned, I mean, yeah, that's just the tip of the iceberg as far as fake news coming out of there. I mean, there was the ghost of Kiev. There was the 13 people on the island who had their heroic last stand, which turned out to be 82 people who had surrendered. And it's not to in any way insult or put, like, the sad thing about it is that you can see that there is a desire here from somewhere to encourage Ukraine to continue this, to somehow get involved in this war, get the West deeply involved in this. And I don't see that. I mean, there's probably arguments to be made here, but I don't see that as being something that either we are actually committed to doing. I don't think the West is committed to going to war with Russia. So taken to its extreme, it's not going to happen. But I also see that as it's potentially giving false hope to people and causing a continuation of suffering that it doesn't need to be, right? Like if you're saying, let's go to the table and let's talk terms, and someone else is in your ear saying, don't worry, don't surrender, we're going to help you, don't worry, we're drumming up everything you need, we're going to give you money, we're going to give you guns, we're going to send people, no worries. It's going to give you a different approach to your conversation. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not the person to say that you should surrender, you shouldn't surrender. I don't know, but I do know that there's also strategic literature in the United States and in NATO that points to a desire to drain Russian resources in exactly a war like this, and they even mention Ukraine as a point of conflict. So this isn't whether it's taking advantage of something that's happened or it's baiting Russia in and then using this to their advantage, whatever it is, I don't see it as something that's going to be to have a good outcome for anybody involved.
Yeah, I agree.
Darya. Sorry, Arthur. Go ahead.
I went way past the question. Sorry about that.
No.
No worries.
You spoke to it as well. Darya, from your side, what do you think? What do you think Russia? I mean, obviously, I think you probably would say Russia should never have invaded Ukraine, right? I think we can all agree on that one. I mean, I agree. That's the thing. Yeah. I agree that Russia should not have invaded. Marc is shaking his head. Go for it, Marc.
Just because you said all of us can agree on it, and I'm not quite sure if I can.
Okay.
I mean, as much as I'm against any war, but yeah, I guess we discussed that quite a bit last time.
Right. My reason for saying that I think Russia should not have invaded is not because it's not because I don't see the reasons for them having done so, at least their reasons for having done so, but it's just that I would have hoped that Russia could have met its goals a different way than invasion. It's along those lines that I say it might be utopian in some way to say it like that. And that's the follow-up question that I wanted to pose to Darya is, if Russia did not invade Ukraine, what is the alternative? Because Russia has problems. The reason that Russia has invaded Ukraine is because Russia has some things that it does not like about the way that things have happened in Ukraine and the way that things have happened with NATO and the way that Russia feels towards the West and that the West feels towards Russia, right? And we can agree or disagree with what Russia or what Putin or what the government in Russia thinks, but they seem to have these concerns. And the question is, if they did not invade Ukraine, what do you think they should have done to address those concerns that they have?
Okay, I don't want to answer something wrong. Can I ask it on German? Vince,
Sure.
kannst du mir nur mal schnell kurz?
Yep, yep.
Yeah, safe.
Also, die Frage war für mich, was ich denke, was die Bevölkerung machen kann, um etwas dagegen anzuhalten, oder?
Nicht ganz. Also, zusammengefasst, Russland hat die Invasion gestartet, weil es gewisse Ziele hat. Oder
Genau.
weil es Probleme hat mit NATO, mit dem Westen und der Westen hat Probleme mit Russland seit langem. Und ja, Russland hat ein Ziel mit dieser Invasion, aber falls sie dagegen entschieden hätte, die Invasion zu machen und irgendwie ihre Ziele anderswo zu erreichen, wie haben sie das können machen? Also statt Krieg.
Okay,
etwas
okay, I
anderes.
understand. Okay.
Okay.
To be honest, I think it would be a friendly solution than war. Like some contracts or irgendwelche Abmachungen. I don't know the exact
agreements.
word. Yes,
Agreements, yeah.
exactly. But not war. So yeah. And I think something we also forget here in Europe, that people who lives in Russia, they are not Putin. Like, okay, the Russian president was going on Ukraine, and the war started. Okay, but the Russian people don't sit like in a kreis,
In a circle.
in a circle, and they said, and everyone said, yes, we want the war. Okay. No, it just one person said that he want the war, and it was Putin. We don't have to forget this. And this is a really really important fact, because a lot of people stand up in Russia and they risk their lives, and the people in Ukraine, also die Leute, das ist abnormal. Ich kann es auf Englisch nicht sagen, sorry.
They're suffering.
Yeah, they're suffering.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Maksym and Alina, do you want to say what you think Putin, the Russian government, could have done instead of invasion? That would have maybe.
Truly speaking, I don't know the alternative ways to achieve their goal. But the problem is that they thought that they will achieve their goal just in 2-3 days. That in Ukraine there are a lot of people who just raise Russian flags and say we will go to Ukraine. Even the eastern part of Ukraine, there are a lot of Russian-speaking people. There are a lot of people who have relatives in Russia, and so he thought that he will come. We will say, yeah, great, we agree, and that he will finish this attack or invasion in 2-3 days. He didn't think that Ukraine will fight back, and people don't want to surrender. So right now, I think maybe you also heard that somewhere on sources, Ukraine really united, and even Mariupol, the city, almost the whole city speaks Russian. Even Kharkov, the whole city speaks Russian. They try to go out, raise Ukrainian flags, and say go away. So during this action, he just united Ukraine. And my opinion is that he, I don't know the other way to achieve his goal,
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that he didn't expect that it will go like this way.
Mm. Okay. Mark,
On
goals
that, I mean,
Sorry, maybe it would be useful for people to say what they think the goals are.
that's what I was just about to get to, is
Yeah.
see
so
if we can...
Maksym, you view Putin's goals as essentially he's trying to liberate Ukraine from an oppressive government that isn't representing the people, and so he expected that the people would appreciate his invasion and
No. Like he didn't expect that people won't appreciate his invasion, but like in my opinion, and according to like my historical thoughts, I think that his goal is what's the problem? Like, to my opinion, he wanted to take Ukraine because he didn't want Ukraine to be a part of NATO or West, because like the worst case, like for example, if Ukraine will be part of NATO, and in Ukraine there will be NATO's like rocket stations and so on, and if there will be a war between Russia and states, then states could like fight Russia. But when Russia will launch rockets, the Ukrainian station, which are like really close to Russia, they will just like destroy them and so on. So like in my opinion, his goal was to don't let Ukraine be a part of West. So like it's almost like all this situation, it goes from 2014 when like he took Crimea, because when when there was a government like Yanukovych and so on, he was like, he appreciated Russia and something like that. They made how to say agreement that Ukraine won't let NATO put their like army stations or rocket stations on Crimea. But when people not according to the law moved out Yanukovych and put the new government, he wasn't sure that these people will like go with this agreement.
Right.
So that is why he decided to take Crimea, because he wasn't sure that NATO won't go there. And all this story, it goes like from 2014, like to my opinion. I see that as this like that.
Maksym, do you think the United States of America would be okay if Russia put a military base in Mexico?
I'm sure not. Like I'm not saying that it's like right and it's a good idea.
I know.
I'm trying to understand like why this happened, and I'm trying to do research like to understand like there should be a reason why this all stuff is going on. So
yes. And I think I keep seeing these things coming from the Western media, claiming that Putin and the Russian government, they have no reason for what they're doing. They're just insane. They're monsters. They're illogical, and so on.
Yeah.
Like,
so
because the way they're trying to do it, it's insane and it's really cruel. Like, to my opinion, like I think that people are like, I think most of people don't understand why this is happening, and no one no one agrees with the way he does this.
Absolutely.
So,
Okay. Yeah. But I would add to that, in the last episode, we spoke about this as well, the difference between how Russia has dealt with Ukraine over the last 1.5 weeks almost, and the way that, for example, the United States of America went into Iraq, right? I don't know if did you see that? The United States invasion of Baghdad?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not saying Putin is doing the right thing. What I'm saying is there is a nuance there between what Russia did in Syria. I watched that very closely.
I want to say about Syria, yeah.
Yeah. And what Russia is doing in Ukraine right now, I heard one journalist calling it tiptoe invasion. That it's such a soft invasion that it's to the West, and that's why people in the United States, like the media, they report that Russia is losing, because they expect an invasion to be like America does invasions. By the time that America is saying we're gonna invade, there's no halfway invasion with the United States. Okay, they go in and they carpet bomb the whole place. And if you saw the live footage of Baghdad, you would know what that looks like. And that's the thing that a lot of people in the West, especially the United States, don't understand, is Russia's form of warfare. I was just listening to another podcaster today talking about it, and he was saying that it seems what Russia is doing is invading a little bit softly, and then using it as leverage or pressure on the Ukrainian government to come to the table. And then after the talks happen, depending on how they go, there's more pressure put on. And then it's to bring them back to the table. But every time that the Ukrainians come back to the table, the demands from the Russian side increase. It's a completely different form of warfare. And the Russian mentality, and I read this years ago as well about what they were doing in Syria. The Russian mentality with warfare is that they see it as an extension of politics. So they kind of use their military in a way to pressurize the other governments to come to the table to make an agreement. And I'm not saying it's right for them to do that. It's just their style of doing it. Whereas the United States and France and the UK and so on, when they form their coalitions, there's no halfway point. They're in for everything. So it's an interesting way to think about it too. But, yeah. But Marc, did you want to weigh in on the goals and ways that Russia could have or should have?
Well, first I was thinking of mentioning what you just did, so I'm glad you got
sorry.
to that about that you noticed that they're changing their propositions, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's because they're actually demanding more, or they realized in the first two rounds of negotiations, the Ukrainians were trying to start from that as let's say like in an Arab market where you go back and forth and you kind of deal, right? And I think what the Russians had first proposed was actually their minimum level of accepted, and then the Ukrainians, like you mentioned, probably due to the influence of foreign powers, decided that's the point they want to start at. We're going to make our counter offer way down here and see how low we can meet it. So what I noticed the Russians have done very recently, I'd say today, yesterday, was move that demand up a notch to show that that's the minimum level, so that they can give the guy the feeling like he's bargaining, but all he's doing is getting something back that the other guys never wanted. And I think their bottom line is still very clear. But I did notice that, at least reported. I'd have to say I've seen it reported because it sounds. I mean, I'd say it sounds sad that we have to discuss things as fact, which when we really, it's as I've seen it reported, which doesn't necessarily mean it's true either. But if we work off that base because we don't have any other, then I'd say that's kind of what I've seen happening. Was there more to the question?
Well, regarding Russia's goals, like, so for example, if I was to just rattle them off the top of my head, I think there's something like the situation that's been ongoing in the Donbas region. I think that's one. The second is regarding the NATO question. And the third is something like, it's not necessarily NATO, but it's something to the degree of Russia wanting Ukraine as this kind of neutral buffer state. And therefore it needs a government there which acknowledges that it cannot even really join the EU, because EU accession is intrinsically tied to NATO membership. So there's kind of, to me, there seems to be those three things. It's the Donbas region, the NATO question, and the neutrality of the Ukraine state, as it were.
Do you think that an additional reason may be sort of the history from the Soviet Union of, well, Russia originating in Ukraine, essentially, and him also having sort of like because Russia views Ukraine as its sisters and brothers, that he doesn't want to lose sort of that history.
So I think what you're referring to is sort of like the thing with the whole USSR, the romanticism.
Yeah. Like I mentioned in the last one, he regards the fall or the collapse of the Soviet Union as the greatest tragedy of the 20th century. So he obviously has some romanticized view of sort of the cluster that was the USSR.
Honestly, my personal opinion, I don't think that's true. I just don't think that Putin's the kind of guy who's getting sentimental over I want Ukraine to be back into Russia. I want to reconstruct the USSR and the Soviet. You know, I just don't see that as. I think he's a realist, and that to me seems like something that would come out of some kind of I don't know, someone who wasn't a realist.
Because he does seem to be at least selling that partially. When he says that he wants to sort of bring Ukrainians back into the fold, or at least liberate them. Like, he's not going to random places on Earth to liberate them. No, it's specifically Ukraine that he's trying to say.
But I think that's more of a propaganda thing for Russians. Yeah. I think that's more to make it more acceptable to people in his own backyard to say, these are our brothers and sisters. We are doing nothing else but going there and embracing them as brothers and sisters.
Definitely helps to sell,
Yeah, I think that's more of a propaganda spiel.
I'd say probably at least two reasons for that. I was going to say the rhetoric, the narrative at home, but also narrative in Ukraine. So I wouldn't put it beyond possible that it's like they were saying. I mean, I don't agree with this Western pushed idea that, you know, he only had a plan of 2 or 3 days and it kind of went sour. I think that's a little bit the narrative for the Ukrainians to motivate them to keep fighting. But probably partially that, kind of to try to get at least a certain part of the population in Ukraine to say it is true, we have a common history, we are common people, what were we thinking? And like we said last time, there's that massive middle ground of people who are, I mean, I saw today's statistics at 2020, in 2020, 28%, only 28% of Ukrainians said they trusted in their government. And that's 2020. So that's,
okay.
And we have to take into account that that's not even including the separatists in the Donbass, because they've been pretty much excluded from Ukrainian political life the past 8 years. So that's talking about in the Western part, or let's say the supposed pro-Western part, there was that little trust in the government. So, I mean, like Maksym was saying, now it seems like the Ukrainians are coming together, being rallied together. Whether that's a good thing or bad can be argued, and I'm sure we'll know by the quantity of blood spilled for it. But like this narrative of like, oh, it was a big happy democracy and everyone was really getting behind the new governments. It's also, I don't know if from a Ukrainian perspective you see otherwise, but from my perspective, it definitely wasn't so. And as far as democratic, I mean, Zelensky's also shut down his opposition and imprisoned Poroshenko, and there's and
that's something I heard as well.
Leader Medvedchuk as well. So it's something fitting for the narrative also in the West that they're trying to push to get Western countries to back their, what we can call their crazy plan, like we've seen develop with the States recently. I was interested in seeing from our Ukrainian guests. I'd be very interested in knowing how you viewed your own government in the past, let's say pre-crisis, pre this specific crisis, and what your thoughts were on the whole, let's say, civil war in the Donbass region the past 8 years, because I think that's probably very important also in defining how we view what's currently going on.
I think that goes in the direction of answering the question of how we got here, isn't it? That's the part of the topic of how we got here that we didn't go through last time, right?
Yeah.
The whole conflict with the Donbas region. Do we want to? Are we ready for an intermission yet, or
We could do it now if you'd like.
Can I say one last thing quickly?
Absolutely.
Of course.
Just in regards to that statistic about the trust in government, just to give a comparison. So we have to say that's 2020, so likely that was prior to the COVID and the lack of trust we've experienced in our countries. But at that same time the survey was conducted in many countries, Switzerland in comparison was about 93% at that time, just so we can say, well,
That's
it's
changed.
28 the average across. Yeah, but I mean, like, let's say if you'd say at that time was at the average across the board. If let's say every country was at 30, then it's not really a shocker. But it was just to kind of put in the balance. So Switzerland might be at the very top of the spectrum, but there's a massive gap in there. So
Wow.
just so that people have something to work with there.
That
Right.
Is
Yeah. Interesting.
Arthur, speaking to these, if we are going to assume that these are kind of the three sticking points for the Russian government, again, the Donbas region, NATO, and the kind of political neutrality of the Ukrainian government, do you see any way that Putin or the Russian government could have solved these three things without an invasion, and how?
I think there's a, so it's hard to say, obviously, because we're not there. We weren't involved in any of the negotiations, but from an outside perspective, and from a psychological perspective, the threat generally tends to be much more scary than the actual action. So this is where I was a little bit shocked that they actually went through with it, because threat of war particularly with Russia is a scary concept for anyone. I mean, it's scary for the United States, and the United States is the United States. So I was a little bit surprised when they actually went through with it, because now that fear is gone. It's like the horror movie when you finally see the monster. It's like, okay, yeah, it's not nice, but it's nowhere near as scary as I thought it might have been. Now, I don't know. Again, Marc had some really interesting points as far as the West has been pushing this concept of, he underestimated Ukraine, and now it's, he's regretting going in. Maybe that's the case too, and this is just nonsense that we're hearing. But I was surprised they went in. I would have hoped, and I'm going to critique the West for a second here again, because that's what I can do, because I know that. I'm very surprised even now at how little diplomacy seems to be happening and how much saber rap seems to be happening. You would think so. With something this potentially inflammatory that can, as we've seen twice in the 20th century, can spark something much bigger than what it is right now, you would think that everyone would have their diplomatic caps on and be trying furiously to find a solution that stops this, separates the parties, finds some sort of good deal. Even the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 60s, that was a very big, I don't know the right word is, like a conflict point, but at a certain point they were able to de-escalate and pull apart, and nothing happened. And that was essentially something similar to this, right? Where you're putting offensive capable weapons on the border of my country, and I'm not going to accept that. So I'm kind of shocked, to be really honest, that no one's been able to come to the table. And what I've heard from Putin is that the West has failed to do this for the last 8 years. And if that is the case, that is a serious problem. That means that everyone who's suffering right now, while not entirely on our shoulders, is partially on our shoulders. Because we should have been doing this, because it was, obviously the West's been involved there. And I was looking at the Budapest Memorandum earlier today, which was the 94 agreement on why Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons, or Soviet nuclear weapons. And the whole point of that was no one was supposed to get involved. Borders weren't supposed to change. Russia and the West were going to stay out of all of this, and Ukraine would retain a certain level of neutrality, so that there was no threat, right? And this is, when you look throughout history, this is the problem. Big countries can roll through smaller countries. Some are easier, some are more difficult. But as a smaller nation, or as a less powerful nation, let's say, because it's a big nation, don't get me wrong, it's a little bit incumbent on you to placate or placate, or however you say that word, the big powers around you. And I know that's not an easy position. I don't envy anyone in that position. But you kind of have to play with the regional powers that are around you. It's the same reason why the Middle East needs to play with Turkey and Israel and Saudi Arabia and Iran. Like these are not easy things to deal with, but to do what Ukraine has done, and I'm not trying to blame Ukraine entirely on for this, but to start talking about nuclear weapons again, and I understand the reason why you want to join NATO, and I understand the reason why you'd want to join the EU from one perspective, but at the same time, I don't know, man. It's a dangerous game, and obviously it hasn't gone well.
I mean, the Ukrainian government had to know that even mentioning the prospect of joining the EU and thereby becoming a NATO member state, they had to know that that's a trigger point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that crosses a line for Russia.
Well, and you got to think there could have been other ways to do this, right? Rather than full EU membership, why not do a Switzerland type deal, right? Where you have maybe East trade, or if I'm not mistaken, I think Norway's also not part of the EU.
Yep.
They're still, good relations there. You can do these in other ways, and I can imagine that. And this is going back to Mark's question for everyone in Ukraine. I'd really be interested to hear your thoughts on this too. But you can imagine that, considering that there was a coup several years ago, that maybe not everyone in the country trusts this government as legitimate, that this government is also fairly, at least somewhat aggressive, let's just say, that there has to be some misgivings. I mean, I know I've been very unhappy with the actions of my government, which is a minority government and acting as if they can just make all the rules whenever they want. So I'd imagine there's I can't believe that everyone would be happy with how things were going up to the invasion point.
Absolutely. All right, should we take a break there for 5 minutes?
Yeah,
And,
sure. I was wondering if you wanted to answer your own question.
No. God, no.
Can I say one last thing, actually, really quickly?
Sure.
Yes.
Just to the point on Putin, there's a quote of him saying that something along the lines of anyone who doesn't feel sadness over the loss of the Soviet Union has no heart. But then he follows that up with, but anyone who wants it now has no brain. I don't think that he's going in that direction. And I think it's probably similar to how someone like me might feel about the British Empire. Yes, there were some things that were bad. There were some great things about it. And, there's this, or the Roman Empire, right? Like there's this majesty around this
nostalgia
power and all this sort of stuff. But if you actually would want either of those to exist right now, I don't know. I don't know if that's the smartest idea.
Yeah. That's exactly. I didn't know that's what he said, but that's what I was saying. With Putin strikes me as a realist, pragmatic sort of guy. He might have some romantic thoughts about the USSR and the Soviet Union, but to recreate it in today's world, I think he's knowledgeable enough to know that that's not smart.
I think that's really interesting, because a lot of the stories I've seen in the mainstream media and also on social media is that he's trying to rebuild the USSR.
Yeah.
And do you know what that quote was from?
It was some speech. I can see if I can find it.
Okay.
But one of the reasons why that might be the case on our side of things is because one of the greatest threats of the last generation was the Cold War, right? That was your danger from the USSR. So if you want to scare a bunch of 50 and 60-year-olds in the West, you tell them what he wants more than anything is to have another USSR.
Yeah. The Red Devil.
Yeah. All right.
Well, I can say something short and sweet to that. So Yeah, I think we can all agree here that ideally this would not have been solved, if you can call it that, with an invasion slash war. If they could have done something more diplomatically with Ukraine and with NATO, that would obviously have been the ideal thing to happen. Of course, when you're dealing with NATO and Russia, two superpowers, you're dealing with bigger stick diplomacy. So the result of that is not going to be just everyone happy and everyone, you know, going away with presents. And yeah, I don't know the inner workings of what Russian interests are and what NATO's interests are to say specifically what they could have done there. But I do agree that it seems like there's a definite lack of an attempt at it. That there's not very much communication.
On the part of Russia, or?
I think from both sides. I mean, you saw how quickly, I don't want to get into this too much because we're going to take a break, but the speed at which sanctions were issued and basically the response from everyone was lightning quick.
Yeah.
And it seemed like there wasn't really any serious attempt at diplomacy there. Yeah. Anyway,
Can I don't know, are we going to get back to this topic after?
Yes.
Or?
We can absolutely,
Okay. No, it's just because there's a couple things
post it.
that I'll probably forget by then, but I'll try to recall them that were very important, or that tied in really well with something said.
Absolutely.
Good.
I'll have to think about my 10 cents to my own question.
I mean, you can say it now. It depends on how long.
No.
All right.
It's better if we go
the break will never happen.
That's it. All right. So 5-minute break, and we'll all be back in 5 minutes.
All right.
Sounds good.
See you guys in a bit.
All right.
Okay.
We are back.
Mm-hmm.
Are we?
Yes.
We're back. We're back.
Back online and balls.
All right. So, Mark,
We had some
I think
pending
we left
words.
off where you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I mean, it was just, I mean, I have lots of things to say, but
Do you
I don't
remember?
want to log the conversation, so, no, just regarding that. So, your question had been, if there was an alternative. I personally do not believe so. And I personally do believe that, at least on the side of the Russian government, they did try to exhaust all alternatives. That's how I see it. You have to think, like, most, let's say, most experts, I'll say quote unquote experts, because I guess anyone can be an expert, but kind of say the tune changed among the Russian government way back in the early 2000s, right, at the Munich Security Conference, where President Putin for the first time came out and started mentioning his concerns for Russia, Russian security, as well as he already hinted at the prospect then that Russia had kind of been ignored for too long and was not taken seriously. And that's given us a very long span of time since then to, let's say, try to find a solution if a solution had been desired. Let's say my heart obviously pains for any and all people who are dying or getting hurt from this current conflict. But um, the truth is, I think Russia was the one who least wanted it to happen, but they were possibly the ones most prepared for it to happen. Um, I mean, there's been in the last months quite blatant, clear, um, let's say, red lines even that were brought up by the Russian government saying exactly what had to be negotiated on. I mean, we know this in the last few months, but these were issues that they had discussed in the past, and then, they sent formally to, what is that now? Probably 6 months back, where they came out and said, look, this has to be taken seriously now, and not just, we're negotiating is always, let's just delay, right? Negotiation usually, so anyways, no, I'm going to get sidetracked, so let's focus on it. Let's just say they said very clearly what they wanted. The West clearly said, we do not want to discuss any of these things. We don't take you seriously. So I don't believe that there were alternative options. I don't think anyone had a true desire. The interesting thing is, and this is the part that I feel the worst of for Ukraine, partially because their government is obviously playing someone else's game for them. But last week, the German chancellor came out and said, I'm really glad that we didn't accept Ukraine into NATO back when we did, and that we weren't even really considering it. And that triggered off a thought in me, which is a bit of a dark thought, but obviously I'd say it confirms maybe biases I've had prior to NATO obviously being the one behind this. But my question simply had been, if the Russians had asked the West months back for a written agreement guaranteeing no NATO partnership with Ukraine, or membership of Ukraine at least, and they knew that they didn't want it already back then, and he said, thank God we didn't do it, then theoretically they already had conceded to their desires, but they're unwilling to put on paper, which means what? It means they didn't want to avoid this from happening, in my opinion. And I think people need to start reflecting on those things. And the Ukrainian people, who are the ones, obviously, who are giving their blood, along with a few mercenaries, which I'm sure we'll talk about later.
Darya.
If I can,
Arthur.
for 1 second, just to what Marc just said, in case anyone's wondering why NATO would ever think that or do that, what kind of motive there would be, there's a 2017 Rand Corporation paper, that discusses exactly why NATO would be interested in doing exactly this. So, and for anyone who wants to know what the Rand Corporation is, they are a think tank, like a very, very prestigious think tank. And they have something like $350 million as far as a yearly budget. And of that, about 200 million comes from the Department of Defense in the United States for strategic resources or, analysis. So this is not some crazy little thing over in the corner.
Okay, interesting.
I was even, just a quick add-on. Yesterday, the day before, I was talking with someone who I find quite intelligent, who has a very broad spectrum of knowledge. And he like threw something at me, like a different perspective. I guess even I mean, we all come from different schools and different positions, so we tend to focus on certain things. And he said, it's possible that this is even a part of an American plan to bankrupt Europe. And I thought, well, he was like, yeah, well, because there's China, there's the US and Europe, let's say, that are economic, or could be potential economic sparring partners. And he said it could be an opportunity the Americans have seen and decided to seize to bankrupt Europe, which we'll see, with all the sanctions, with not doing rational things like opening Nord Stream 2, possibly. If the Americans' goal is indeed to absorb that 40% of European energy market, the prices will obviously be far higher, so that will be European people paying for that, along with, I mean, after the COVID and all the billions of debt there, now that they're sending billions to Ukraine and weapons and supposed aid, that could actually be something that happens, whether that was desired or not.
Yeah, well,
It's just
whether
that was just like
that's
a far left field,
yeah,
far
that's
left field idea that was thrown at me, and I guess in this situation where any guess is probably as good as another, and I think actually probably it's a whole lot of guesses put together because it's such a complex thing and it involves so many aspects. It could come from so many different parts of the field.
never let a good crisis go to waste, huh? That's seems to be the motto since a while now. I was going to ask Darya regarding your Ukrainian family, Alina as well, Ukrainian family, Ukrainian friends, and so on. Do you know of anyone who is, or how do you see it among the Ukrainian people you know? Are they aware of the tensions throughout the years between well, Russia and the West and Ukraine kind of in the middle? Are they aware of this?
Алина, я думаю, тебе быстро надо помочь.
Okay, I think that they understand that we are between all these two, between Europe and Russia, but that's why we try to be a part of European Union, because we don't want to be like a brother and sister with Russians. We understand what they have, and we hate their politic situation and their government. We don't accept this. We don't accept that, and that's why we try to be on the west part.
So you see the West as more attractive than Russia. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's what she said.
Yeah. Okay. But the people in the Ukrainian people, do they understand or realize this conflict that is existing between the West and Russia, and how Ukraine is kind of sitting in the middle of it? Do they understand that struggle and sort of the bigger picture?
Like, you want to say that with this understanding, we have to just like sit on a place and like, do you understand what I want to say? Like,
I'm not saying that I think they should do or not do anything. I'm just wondering if it's sort of a conscious reality in the minds of Ukrainians that this is the reality, that they sit between, like, geographically, they sit between the frontier of two world powers.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we understand it.
You understand that? Okay. Because I don't know. I you know, I'm just asking as a dumb Westerner. So I don't know what the conception is of the Ukrainian people.
But we're just looking for better choice for us, like way to survive.
Yeah.
And we need help from someone. We can't fight only by ourselves. That's why we're asking NATO and Europe.
Yeah. I mean, before the fight, I can understand it would have been. I'll wait for them to finish their discussion. I can understand it would have been a very difficult place to be. It's sort of like in the middle of your. I don't know if this is the correct analogy, but sort of in the middle of your mother and father almost. It's like you want to make both of them happy. You don't want to make either of them mad, right? That's kind of the thing. You don't want to piss Russia off. You don't want to piss Europe off. And maybe you like Europe a bit more than you do Russia, right? And you're sort of in the middle, and you know that both Russia and the NATO nations want to win you over. Is that something that you can see happening in Ukraine, or sort of something that Ukrainians think about? Is that they're sort of being pulled between these two forces.
I would say yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Hmm.
And do they? Because I read something interesting the other day that said it was sort of an analysis of the whole conflict going back decades, in fact. And in the end, it concluded, so it made a conclusion, that basically, even if Ukraine wants to be part of the EU, it cannot be allowed to. And it's a strange thing to be told that you as a sovereign nation, for the better, it's kind of like for peace in the world to exist, you cannot decide for yourself what you want to do. That's like yeah.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
Do you understand
the curse
that?
of being in certain places.
Yeah.
I understand you want some comments or.
Well, do you understand that way of thinking, and what do you think about that? It's a tough one, huh?
Yeah.
Like, if Mexico had the choice to make an alliance with Russia, I mean, the international community, I think, would be, would say, no, we can't allow Mexico to do that, right? And it's a tough thing because it's a sovereign country, and a sovereign country should be allowed to make whatever alliances it wants and so on, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I believe. I'm Swiss. I think that Switzerland should have the right to make whatever agreements it wants within its own interest, right? But if the consequence of Switzerland making an alliance means that we are going to have maybe a third world war, it's almost like you have to say maybe we sacrifice that right to choose. I don't know. It's.
I don't know if you hear that, but a lot of people are discussing this here in Europe, and a lot of people say we don't want to help Russia and Ukraine so much with military stuff and like this, and we don't want to go in their political situation. We want to help, like humanitarian help, people who are Flüchtlinge,
Refugees.
refugees. We take refugees in our countries and stuff like this, but Europe are scared, and I think a lot of people are scared to say something or help everywhere in military help, or I don't know, just to say something to this whole situation. This is critical and dangerous, really dangerous. Here in Switzerland, we organized so Spendeaktionen. Donations, yes.
Yep.
And also in Solothurn, the movie is the TV is coming, the radio is coming, some journalists are coming, and they all said to us, because we said something, we can't say something really too political, because it's dangerous.
Yes. Either way, right? Political in either direction, it's very dangerous.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think to your point earlier, Emmanuel, what you're saying with the mother and the father, it's even more tricky, because imagine in that scenario, you now have the person in between is not a little kid. It's like a teenager, it's an adult that wants to do its own things as well. And the mother and the father both happen to be a little bit controlling, maybe one more than the other, but they're both a little bit like that. But yeah, it's Sorry, I just had to say that.
Could I add something to that analogy?
Mm-hmm.
You have to imagine in that picture, you also have
A dog.
an evil older brother or sister
Sorry.
who is telling you what to do that he knows will lead you to get punished.
Yeah.
Because he knows you're too dumb to know not to do it.
Interesting.
And that's what we have in this analogy if we want to make it maybe full circle.
Yeah. And it's a little bit of a shame that, and again, we're not involved in this. It's, we're not part of the negotiations. Maybe these were all ideas that were tried and thrown out there and crushed and whatever it is. But you'd think there could be some sort of compromise reached in which the EU says, okay, Ukraine gets all these particular privileges of EU membership, maybe not full status, or maybe in return for the fact that there will be no, military XYZ stationed there. So Russia gets what they want, Ukraine gets what they want. But then the difficulty, I guess, always comes in that everyone is pursuing their best interest. Mm-hmm. So it's not like the EU is not there going like, how can I make Ukraine's life better? Hold on, let me just figure out a good solution for Ukraine. They're thinking, how can I make, our particular prerogatives come to pass? Yeah. And so is NATO, and so is the United States, and everyone. So
that's a very good point. Yeah.
I would take the EU maybe a little bit out of the picture, or the importance of the EU a bit out of this picture. So the EU is sort of, you can imagine it as the humanitarian / political front of NATO, in a similar way as you had supposed, like the white helmets in Syria. I think that's probably an adequate comparison. So it's kind of like the terrorists front to the world to attract funding for their war or whatever. And the EU is that kind of thing. So the EU, I do not believe, judging by in the past, they really didn't want to even take the former East European bloc countries in. It was something NATO really forced upon them. And that's why with Ukraine, I suspect the EU probably had zero self-interest in that. It was simply, as I said, that political front. It also makes it attractive, whatever the move is, because obviously most countries are aware if we are not contributors to the EU, we are beneficiaries, which means we get free money and we get to have better lives in a better country. So that's generally the push from the one side. Oh yeah, we want to be part of the EU. It was very strong in Eastern Europe when, let's say, when the wall fell, and I'm sure it's currently and in the past was very strong. I mean, that's sort of what kicked it off, right? Was in 2008 with the Romania memorandum, where they said, yes, we'd like to send our membership to Ukraine and Georgia, and I personally have a hard time believing that was the EU looking for one more place to put lots of money into.
Okay.
That's just my opinion.
Well, I guess I can give my 10 cents on what I think what I think about this question that I posed. I'll start by saying that when I heard that this invasion was happening, I was also surprised. But what shocked me more was when I heard that the situation in the Donbas region had been, well, let's just say, unresolved since the situation that occurred in 2014 and the what was it called, the Minsk agreement that was signed in 2014. When I heard that was the case, that the Donbas region had been essentially under assault, both militarily and economically and politically, and that now this is of course according to the leaders of the Lugansk and Donetsk regions, and according to Russia, this is from their side, that they were saying that the agreement of the Minsk agreement, the conditions were not being met, since 8 years, and that there was violence occurring from the Donbas region over to the Ukrainian side, and the Ukrainian side back over to the Donbas area, to these two republics. What shocked me so much is that I thought that when the Minsk agreement was signed, I thought that it was sorted out. And the reason I thought that was because here in the West, there was nothing in the media about it after that. There was nothing. And that's what shocked me, that there was a complete blackout of the information regarding the conflict that was occurring for 8 years right there between these two independent republics, self-proclaimed independent republics, and the greater Ukraine. That's what really shocked me. Mm-hmm. I couldn't believe that that situation had been going on for 8 years, and I had not seen anything about it in the mainstream headlines in the West. So that's what was really shocking to me. So this rolls into the question of, had Putin not invaded Ukraine, what were the alternatives for it realizing its goals, for it sorting out the issues that it had with regarding Ukraine and the West and so on? If the media in the West wasn't even allowing a trickle of information, and I, especially over the last 2.5 years, I have been very heavily engaged in the media, and I have not seen even a trickle of the information regarding the situation in the Donbas region and Ukraine. So if they could not even allow a trickle of that information to come through to the West, I mean, to me, that means that there must have been also in a diplomatic sense, a complete blackout. And I can only say that because I have no evidence to the opposite. I haven't seen, all these years, I haven't seen any kind of, diplomatic arrangements being made between various nations. I think Germany signed, France signed. I think they were the, who?
No, that's it, the four of them.
That's it, yep. Mm-hmm. And I haven't seen anything in the media about these countries getting back to the table and the media covering this and saying, yeah, the situation is not that great. The agreement is not being held by either side. Nothing. So I can only assume, from my ignorant perspective, that it was not within the West's interest to sort out the problems that were occurring since 8 years in Ukraine. So I'll finish real soon. If that's true, if I'm Russia, if I'm the Russian government, if I'm Putin, and I'm sitting there thinking like, okay, this has been going on now for 8 years. Just this little thing this thing that's happening in Ukraine alone has been going on for 8 years. And I assume that the people in the Lugansk and Donetsk region have been trying to get publicity. Actually, I saw documentaries. This is the thing. Over the last week, I've been watching documentaries that were made in the Donetsk and in the Lugansk region. And there are Americans in there and other Europeans in there doing all kinds of archaeological digs and so on, finding mass graves from stuff that happened over the last 8 years. Horrific stuff that's been going on there. Now, of course, I'm just seeing this on a screen. Can I verify all of this is 100% legit? No. But neither can I do that for the other stuff on the other side, right? For what the West is telling me. But this stuff has been reported on. But the TV channels, the newspapers and so on in the West have not been airing this stuff. They will still be airing every week. They will be airing documentaries on World War II. But I haven't seen a single documentary being aired about, the situation that's been ongoing for 8 years now in that area of Europe. And I can only assume that as a Russian looking at that and thinking, well, 8 years hasn't gotten us anywhere, right? No one's coming to the table. No one from the West is actually taking this situation seriously. And as far as I know, Russia didn't just, or Putin or the Russian government didn't just decide from one day to the next, hey y'all, we're going to war, right? As far as I know, they had actually been repeatedly over the last few years been saying, if this shit doesn't straighten itself out, we're coming in. And no one believed them. No one in the West believed them. And like someone else was saying here, they were shocked that they actually did it. Like it wasn't just a threat, they actually did it. And that threat had been ongoing for years. So I don't like sitting from a Russian perspective and seeing this going on for as long as it has. It doesn't seem like the West is acting in good faith. So I still hoped that Russia would not have to do this. And I don't want to say that they had to, because they didn't. They didn't have to. But that's the difference between kind of almost like a, I don't want to say romanticized, but kind of like wishful thinking, and sort of the reality that's on the ground. It's like, okay, what was the alternative? Yeah. And I honestly don't see what alternative Russia had. So that's my, I don't know, maybe if they shut off the gas pipeline to Europe and, you know, but then what? Like, I don't know, maybe that would have worked.
The thing with sanctions like that, or if they were to shut off the gas line to Europe, is that hurts them too.
Yeah.
It's the same as the sanctions that us in the West are levying on Russia right now. It's hurting us.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
Yes.
So, yeah.
I would argue the sanctions hurt more than a pipeline. I wanted to if you were did you complete your point there?
I'm done.
You're done. Yeah, I wanted to ask what all of your thoughts are on the sanctions. Whether you think that they were good and how do you view the fallout from that essentially? Could start with
everyone loves sanctions, right? We all love sanctions.
Don't everyone talk at once.
Let someone else start.
Darya, what do you think about the West's response?
Yes, the sanctions. Just quick on German, Leute, ich bin mir dort durch im Fall sehr umstritten, was das angeht. Ich will dort nicht falsche Informationen weitergeben, darum wollte ich die Frage wieder auslassen.
Okay. Umstritten. Like, you don't have a definitive answer, I suppose?
Nein,
or idea?
Nein,
okay.
Also nein, ich will mich dazu ehrlich gesagt noch nicht wirklich äußern, weil ich für mich selber noch nicht...
Okay, that's a problem. Okay, we can give the question to the next person, whoever wants.
Maksym?
Yeah, like, in my opinion, this, like, I have a lot of relatives who live in Russia, a lot of friends and so on, because I spent almost, like, my childhood summer there with grandparents. So I'm talking right now to them, and as I don't know if you see these reports, 100,000 of people, like for this just couple or 3 days, got fired from their jobs there in Russia.
Wow. Okay.
Because like fabrics closed, like this, a lot of shops and so on. Just like prices going up, and as I see, like that these sanctions they push Russian people. Like I see that they work like this. They like push Russian people, and then Russian people
stand up,
push the government. Like I see this like that.
Pressure.
Like pressure, yeah. They like make pressure on people, and then like people should make pressure on government. But right now in Ukraine, like Zelensky a lot of times already said that sanctions, but we don't get any like people help. I mean, like yes, we get like armor, guns, and so on, but we can't just born new soldiers like today and tomorrow they will go and fight for us. So like like I see this like that.
Do you think the sanctions hurt the ordinary person more than they hurt the I guess the people who the sanctions are made for? You know what I mean? Like, we are told we need to put sanctions against Russia because Putin and the Russian government is horrible, yeah? But then it seems like the people of Russia are the ones who are being affected worst of all.
Innocent people.
In my opinion, yes.
By any measure.
Right. And that's supposed to create kind of like a pressure on the people for them to revolt against the Russian government.
Like, I see this like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think that's generally what the idea of sanctions are, even though it's not said like that. But it's obvious that that's how it's supposed to work.
It's
right?
not a very clean form of
it's quite dirty
warfare.
Actually.
Yeah.
It's horrible. It's like you make the poorest people in a country suffer, right? Because it's always going to be the poorest people first who suffer the most, right? Yeah. And then gradually, as the sanctions continue, you're going to have then slightly richer people being affected, and then it goes up and up and up, and maybe when it hits the middle class, then maybe you'll see that revolt that you wanted the whole time. But in the meantime, you've destroyed the lives of so many people to get there. So it's a kind of economic warfare, isn't it?
Yeah. Siege warfare. I think one of you mentioned that last time. Yeah. Modern siege warfare.
Well, Marc or Arthur, what do you think about the impact of the sanctions? Do you think that the Russian government and Putin haven't conceived of the idea that there might be sanctions put on them, and they're just gonna, this is gonna make Putin change his mind and get the hell out of there?
Go ahead.
Mark.
Go ahead. No, you
go for it, Arthur.
I actually wanted to hear what you had to say. But all right, I'll say really quickly. I think there's a couple of things about the sanctions that are interesting and concerning. One is Russia's been sanctioned. I don't think I ever remember a time where the West wasn't sanctioning Russia for something, or for nothing, or just throwing sanctions on for the sake of sanctions or interest on sanctions. So I don't know. This does seem to be hurting them. I mean, I would assume it is. But there's 2 points that are really interesting to me about this. One is there's this, and this is my own personal concern, there's this cooperation between corporation, and when I say corporation, I mean global corporation, and Western global governance, let's say, that's terrifyingly unified. Mm-hmm. The ability to cancel a country for whatever reason, like, let's take aside reasons for it, but just the ability to entirely cancel a country beyond, it used to be you'd have economic sanctions, right? So a corporation would have to find a way around, or just would not deal with that whatever. But right at this point, it's like you can't use Visa or MasterCard. You can't, like, companies are canceling that country, and that's an interesting development, and shouldn't be a comforting development for anybody. Because obviously in the West, we've been dealing with cancel culture now for quite a while, and on an individual level, it's devastating, and it's really dangerous because it gets wrapped up in this sort of pathological thinking that, or whatever direction the media happens to point their camera, everyone rushes to destroy that thing, and that like so many historical examples, is not a good thing. So that's a concern. And then on the other side, from a long-term perspective, I think that the West is suffering right now from 2 different things that are combining to cause some serious issues. One is it's led by ideologues who are juvenile in their thinking, it seems. These people who have a very ideological bent, but they're not diplomats, they're not statesmen as of the type we've seen in the 20th century. These are, for Canada, it's a drama teacher, right? His second in command is a journalist. These people are not
Mm-hmm.
experts, let's just say, in what they're doing, and so they're they're deciding the course of the future for a lot of the globe based on, I don't think, very deep understandings of the consequences of their actions.
Mm.
And then on top of that, that's married to a hubris that rose in the West from the fall of the Soviet Union, where they were the unmatched power for a very long time. And I think that there are still people in the West who believe that's still the case, that they are this unmatched power, nothing can touch them. They can do whatever they want and mess up whatever they want and sanction whatever they want. And in the end, they're going to win and they're going to come out better for it. This ties into the issue I was going to bring up, the last issue, which is, in the long run, as a Westerner, the last thing I want to see is Russia, China, and India unifying into an economic bloc against the West. Because that's a massive portion of the world's population. And these are not silly third world countries that you could just ignore. These are economic powerhouses that are developing very quickly, and some could argue are surpassing us in many ways. So I think that there's a lot of these things in play, and I think that the sanctions, while they feel virtuous and moral to some people over here, to the drama teachers and the journalists, I don't think that, now maybe they are foreseeing the future, but I don't think that it's going to have the intended consequence, whether or not that intended consequence was good to begin with.
On the note of sanctions, I saw today that Russia is, and it speaks to your point, Arthur, about a sort of a new Eastern power with India, China, and Russia, and that has to do with the cancellation of the credit card systems in Russia, MasterCard and so on, Visa. And today I read that Russia is going into union with the Chinese alternative of credit card systems.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, and someone tweeted this out, like, I had the tweet saved somewhere, but I can't find it off now. But it was essentially something like, if this was the goal of the West, right? Well done. To basically force Russia away from the West and into the arms of China, especially China, basically. Then well done.
If I can add one thing to that,
mm-hmm.
or two things really quickly. The problem with that, I think, to me, the thing that really hurts me when I hear that is that for the last 20 some years, Russia's been trying to establish good relations with the West.
Mm-hmm.
As much as there's been, this back and forth, and there is this historical, what do you call it? Polarization, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. History, yeah.
They've been trying to have good relations with the EU, with NATO, with all these sorts of things. They even tried to join it a couple of times. I don't know how deep the reality of that was, but it seems like it I don't see a reason from my perspective why that couldn't have been something that was strengthened, right? Or at least bonds being strengthened there, with a nation as geopolitically significant as Russia. You would think that's a good way to go.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But then secondly, just on that note as well, the reason why I say India as well is because I've been listening to a few Indian analysts on this topic, which is interesting because not a lot of people listen to India, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
They're torn between the United States and Russia. They have very
Yep.
close alliance with Russia and very
Mm-hmm.
close alliance with the United States. But if forced to choose, they have more self-interest in their alliance with Russia than they do with the United States.
Mm-hmm.
The United States has screwed them over by supporting Pakistan several times. So it's not like, to what I said earlier, I don't know if the US knows this. I don't know if NATO knows this. I'd assume they do, but this can't be good long term.
Yep.
Anyone else have something to add on that note?
I'm really curious what Mark thinks.
We all are. Mark.
In regards to the sanctions,
Yes.
well, I remember way back when I was doing my studies. That was around the time, around the time when, let's say, the whole thing blew up with the coup in Ukraine, and I remember at class or other students there all talking about sanctions and this and that, and I definitely agree with what you had mentioned before, E-Man, about sanctions. I was in a meeting with a foreign affairs think tank the other day, and they were pretty much harping along the same line, this kind of, sanction them, sanction it. And I'm like, at least people in my line of work, you kind of know sanctions are meant to impact the poorest people to rise up and revolt, ideally. That's the only, I've never seen it actually work. I mean, just look back at Iraq. I mean,
right.
bloody hell! I mean, millions of people starving, hundreds of thousands of children dying, and you could say no impact as far as if the desired impact truly is to inspire change in government. In regards to sanctions, long term, I was in political economics class, and the professor was drawing up some supply and demand curves and explaining to us sanctions and their effect. At some point I stopped and I said, hey dude, like, theoretically, just by these curves, then the only ones who lose out on sanctions are the ones who place them. Because what you do is that long term, well, the other guys will pretty much find ways to replace whatever they're losing, and all you do is lose that slot in their market you used to have. And in class, lots of my colleagues were kind of like, actually the professor hadn't even thought of it himself. You saw him, he kind of stopped and breathed a second and maybe was like, oh, whoa, maybe that's something I can write my next paper about, kind of thing. But like most of the classmates, they're kind of like, oh yeah, sanctions, and then it's going to be gone and everything will go back to normal. It's like, no. A sanction is an act of war. So if you decide to levy a sanction on Russia, whenever you decide that for you the conflict is over, you think they're going to just come running back to you? Like, why would they? I mean, sorry, you'd be stupid. You'd look for every possible other supplier anywhere on the globe to replace it with. I'm sure they're aware, but that's why I said it kind of ties in with the U.S.'s desire to gobble up that 40% share of energy supplies to Europe. I'd say that's probably, if you'd really try to find one true root of the crisis, that's probably what it comes down to. Combined with, I also saw now the Americans are really trying to encourage Eastern Europeans, especially those who publicly hate Russia, to pretty much do some kind of trade-off deal. I give the Ukrainians a MiG and I'll get an F-16 in return. And I was thinking, like, you have to think, like, the past few decades, America has that massive chunk of military market they've been losing out on because it comes from the Warsaw Pact, and they pretty much couldn't insert their weapons into those countries because they're not compatible. So now they're even coming out with really forthright ideas. It's kind of like, okay, boom, and then after that, you're going to be fully dependent on us, and we'll have your market chunk of the military as well. God forbid anyone actually falls for that. And but back to the sanctions. So sanctions, as I said, it'll hurt the poor people long term. It will hurt the countries that levy them. Like, it even kind of connects with what that friend of mine had said about this idea that maybe it's a plan to somehow bankrupt Europe. You never know what's going on behind the scenes. I saw today that the Russians have signed a new deal with Pakistan, so they're already expanding their market. I saw trade with China's up like 35% compared to a year ago or something like that. So at the end of the day, we need to see it like this. China has interests as well, and I'd say a very quick and easy way for China to send a signal to those who also consider them their enemy would be to just do what America is trying to do in Europe, just reverse. Because so far, all the big powers have been making a big effort on trying to diversify energy supply locations. So they've really been working to diversify. That's why you'd say for Europe, probably 100% of its energy could come from Russia and would make the most sense financially, but they didn't want to be that dependent, so they brought it down. China's done the same, but China could, for their own interest, just say, all right, well, whatever we've been shipping in from the Gulf, which we pay extra for because of transport, we're polluting, so it would even be a green idea to just pipe it straight in from our pals up north. Everything we've been getting from the Americans, we're going to just cut off. And there would actually be a very small loss. And that's not even long term. That could be done instantly. Perhaps even already has been agreed somewhere behind the scenes. So far, Europe hasn't cut off, or they haven't sanctioned gas and oil yet, so they haven't done that. It's possible they never will because they might then have their people on the streets against them, which then is kind of counterproductive. The aim you actually had intended for the Russians will befall you, and they've had their own numbers of people on the streets the last couple of years, and I think they're probably going to be wary of doing that. But yeah, as far as sanctions, I'd say that's my idea.
Okay.
Again, once again, like as someone who is a pacifist who likes resolving conflicts, I think I mentioned this last time, the shortest way to end this crisis is to not send a dollar, not send a bullet, don't influence their politics, don't in any way encourage them to lose their blood, because that's what's being done right now.
Yeah.
There's a very strong push in the media and the propaganda machine. The push is simply saying, Ukrainians, don't worry, somewhere, even if it's just in spirit, our spirits are one around this globe and we are with you. Go and die. Go and die. Go and die for what? Just do it, shed your blood because it's romantic. And even these, getting in volunteers from abroad who go in as mercenaries. I read some articles today, don't know how trustworthy it is because we don't trust any of it, right? But saying what they're being offered up to $2,000 a day to go and fight in Ukraine. So this money is coming from somewhere.
I read today that Denmark is wants to put a referendum to the people of Denmark to allow it to break away from the EU basically rule that they cannot unilaterally go to war. So that's pretty serious, where a country basically says we so badly want to get engaged in a war that we want to break off from an EU agreement, like a clause in the EU agreement that says they cannot by themselves go and engage in war. And then I saw as well that there was about 20 or 25,000 European mercenaries headed towards Ukraine. Supposedly, but it wouldn't be the first time for sure. I mean, that was already occurring in 2014, right, with the conflict back then, and it was happening, by the way, on both sides. There was people who were fighting for the Donbas republics that were foreigners as well. So it was happening on both sides. But speaking to the damage in fuel price, or the damage to the west, can you share this?
Yeah.
So this is currently fuel prices in the continent of Europe. That's pretty striking when I saw that. So green is cheap, and the further red it goes, the higher the price. And yeah, that's pretty telling of where are the highest prices for fuel between Moscow and Portugal at the moment. And then on a matter of, I don't know if that's correctly visible there, but you can. So that's the price of gas. This is in the EU, by the way. This is the price of gas in the EU. So that massive spike there. That's over a 1-year period. You can go out to a 5-year. That's what it looks like over 5 years. So it's not a small increase by any stretch of the imagination. You can look at heating oil, and basically it's the same pattern everywhere. You look at all the forms of energy, they've all shot through the ceilings. And first and foremost, that's going to affect, well, people like me, because I'm just an ordinary taxpayer.
Yep.
So, I mean, we saw here just within the space of, basically in 2 weeks, we saw the price of diesel, for example, go from, what was it, 183, so this is Swiss francs, 183, and now we have easily I think I saw today 2 francs 8 cents. So from 183 to 2.8 or 2.08. So, and that was pretty much overnight that it just went up like that. So, and that affects everything. That affects prices of groceries in the store, because it affects transportation, and it affects what it takes to actually produce those goods and so on. So there's a huge knock-on effect. And of course, the rich people, well, they feel it a lot less than middle class on down.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. It's like these sanctions were initially enacted to motivate, arguably, the oligarchs and the rich people and the powerful to do what they wanted, but how the system works is it comes from the bottom up. Like, the poorest people get affected the most, and the motivation comes from suffering at the bottom, not at the top. Essentially in the exact opposite direction that
it should be.
That
in a way.
should function in. Yeah.
Marc, high five.
Sorry, it just reminded me of something I had taken note of a couple days ago in regards to sanctions, and I was thinking of a possible intentional or non-intentional side effect. As we've seen, like the stock market prices shoot down. We've seen Russian oil obviously shoot down as far as stock investment. And I was thinking from a liberalist, not a libertarian, but a liberalist perspective. It generally encourages the involvement of non-government actors to interconnect countries so that they may then influence them politically. And I was thinking from a Russian government perspective. So I haven't looked into stocks and shares and how much of, let's say, predominantly government owned or influenced companies in Russia belong to the state. But I'm going to assume that they might, at best, like most countries do, just retain a majority share. Because obviously, if you can rule things and have it funded by foreign direct investment, that's your ideal, right? So now, what I sense with this, I mean, if from a Russian government perspective, if all the shares now hit the floor, with my reserves, I could buy these shares all up. I could literally own 80, 90, 100% of these companies, which means then for the future, not only do I raise my benefits incredibly, but it means that there will be that much less possibility for foreign influence on my politics, because there's no liberalism happening there.
Right.
So as I said, I don't know if that's intended or an unintended possible side. I just read it as a possible side effect because it's just something that came to my mind while I'm sitting around, which I often just kind of pour over ideas in my head, and that came to me, and I'm like, well, whether they do it or not, who's to say? But that would be definitely, let's say, if we see the Russian government as a very totalitarian or authoritarian government, then this would be a brilliant opportunity to just gobble up really cheap everything that the West is giving up.
That's true.
And thus gain even more political influence in their own country.
Right. Arthur, did you want to say something? Add something there?
Well, I was gonna take that in a little bit of a different direction. So if you had something on that, it's better to go to you.
Me? No. I wanted to slip into something else on the side.
Okay. All right. Well, just really quickly as well. And I apologize. I keep bringing up things from the Western perspective, or from our perspective, or over on this side of North America.
Don't expect anything less.
Because we're self-centered. Say. No, that's what I know. But one thing that I find so interesting too, back to what I was saying earlier about ideology and being led by ideologues, is that during that same 8-year period that you were talking about earlier, Emmanuel, where this crisis was growing, let's say. Over here, we were focused on completely crushing our own energy sector and moving to these wonderful, fanciful new forms of energy that, one day might totally be awesome, but aren't yet. And this is the thing that I'm kind of interested in seeing what this does, because I know there are people in the government of Canada right now. There are definitely people in the United States government that are thinking this too, that would love to take advantage of this to transition to non-fossil fuel energy, even though that doesn't exist in the quantities needed to actually do anything, or to actually support the countries that they're talking about. And this is why I like, it's so tough to watch what's happening, to know what's planned and orchestrated and what's just idiocy playing itself out. Because, when you see those kinds of prices, someone who has or I guess geopolitics is this, it's a coming together of a number of different fields of different, things that are going on all at the same time, trying to understand how all of these things impact your country or your region. And I really wonder, how they're going to respond to this energy crisis. I think that I have a feeling the response will be ideological, and they're going to drive more to what Marc was saying. Like, Russia's going to be even pushed further to their own devices, let's say, and we're going to just crush our own economies trying to be ideologically pure.
Right. Just signal our virtue. Yeah. I think when was it Elon Musk tweeted just like yesterday or the day before?
I think it was yesterday.
Was it yesterday?
He said stuff. Which one are you referring to?
Well, he tweeted that the oil production needs to be increased. And he actually says in the tweet, this will be bad for Tesla, but unfortunately this has to happen. Like, this is a guy who's not ideological. He sees that even if it's going to hurt him a bit and his company, okay, he can take a hit. He's okay. But
well, the United States is reaching out to Iran, to Venezuela, other places that they have
interesting relations with.
Yes, right. And I know that Saudi Arabia is also now cozying up to Russia, so that's an interesting development as well. Considering that they were are a close ally of the United States. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on that could, like, I don't know. To me, if the West jumps into all of this feet first, ideologically blind, just raring to go, it doesn't go well.
I wanted to mention something, just mainly for our Ukrainian participants as well. I know that the discussions last time it happened as well, I almost felt like the discussion gets pulled away from Ukraine as a topic, but just because I guess maybe it helps see that Ukraine is, if you see as a chess game, it's really just a pawn on the board, and the issues are really so much larger, which is sad because it takes off our focus maybe from focusing on actually resolving the crisis. Well, or trying to resolve what seems to be the crisis over there. So I just wanted to apologize if it seems like we're not
it's totally
talking
fine.
or thinking so much on Ukraine. It's just it really is
I like that you mentioned that. From looking around on social media at what different people are saying, from my perspective, I could see them not necessarily arguing, but basically speaking on either one of two levels. On sort of the political, geopolitical level, or the populist level. So like you said, that if you're looking at it from a geopolitical level, yeah, it's a pawn. It's just a pawn, and you're thinking about strategy and reasoning from either the West or the East. And if you look at it just from there, you could even say, yeah, it makes sense what Putin did. Like, you know, he's got this choice or that choice, and he's going to go with the best move. But if you go down a level, then you say, no, he shouldn't have done that.
On
like
the ground,
from,
right.
If you
Ground
look at
zero.
it from a democratic perspective, like the Russian people didn't want this, the Ukrainian people didn't want this. This was a bad move from a populist level. So having both of these levels in a discussion, like, it's difficult to find a balance, at least for me. Because unfortunately in this instance, and I guess it's not to be unexpected, but they do kind of contradict. Like on one level, something makes sense. On the other,
very
it
different
doesn't.
perspectives you get from looking at either level.
Yeah.
That's why I wanted to pose the question to our Ukrainian guests, regarding the topic, and this might be a sore point or like a touchy subject, regarding the point of the conflict that's been going on in the Donbas region. Do you want to comment at all on sort of what you perceive of it, what you know of it, maybe your opinion on what happened there, and do you think that those regions have the right to be independent, that they should be independent, or what about the problems that they've had with the Minsk agreement? Maybe you've heard things from your family regarding the situation there over the last few years. Silence. Okay, we'll go to a pause. No.
That's not an easy one.
After this short break. You don't have to if it's.
I just unmuted the mic, so.
Right. Didn't see your lips moving, so.
I have a lot of thoughts and made a lot of research on what was going on there and why it happened in 2014. And like from. You said a lot of times that it was conflict like before happening in like between Ukraine and Donbas, and Russia was just looking and thinking, "Oh, I should help them to solve this." But like,
yeah.
To summarize what you were talking about.
Very simple, yeah.
And like from our perspective in Ukraine, that's also like, of course, in 2014. Of course, there were some people who wanted to go to Russia and so on. There are always in all countries there are people who like want something else than the government does. But like there were a lot of researchers, and it started because there were a group of people like who moved from Russia to Donbas region in Donetsk, Lugansk, and these cities, and they like just were throwing like putting oil in the fire. Like, you understand what I'm saying, maybe that if there weren't these people from Russia, like this maybe Rose Guardian and so on, who started all of this stuff, this all like Donbas situation wouldn't happen. And
sorry, are you
and like about this like war that was going in Donbas in Ukraine, there were a lot of research that Russia was attacking Donbas, and they were saying that Ukraine does this to them. And when they ask right now, that where have you been this all 8 years? It's a big slogan right now in Russia. Like Russia, because they're putting this in this way that we were fighting with Donbas, but it wasn't so. So like.
You were saying that people from Russia were moving into the Donbas region.
like groups of people
Yeah.
in 2014. They were like inserted. How to say this? Like maybe
Yeah.
you understand what I'm saying, yeah?
Yeah.
They were like put in Donbas region, and they started this agitation, this like with weapons and so on, to raise people who wanted to go to Russia and start all this movement like war and so on.
Okay,
Like,
so
this is how it happened there, like in 2014. So I said about that because a couple of times you say that it's like a conflict between Ukraine and Donbas, but it was like forced from Russia's side.
Okay, so what you're saying, if I understand this correctly, is that Russia was sending people. Now, are we talking like families and like
no, like people with weapons, with
like fighters or
like fighters who
Okay.
who like
who
Instigate.
like who wanted basically to foment the situation
Yeah.
there and make an uprising.
yes.
Okay. So before that, before Russia sent these people in, do you think there were people already there who were sort of like feeling like they were not part of the political process anymore? Maybe they
Yes,
were
of
pro-Russia or...
Of course,
Or-
like there were people who were seeking that, it would be cool to be part of us because it's really close to Russia. We have a lot of relatives and friends and so on, like across the border.
Mhm.
And but if without these Russian groups, like let's say, they would do nothing. Like maybe you should understand that they had to feel some kind of push
Yep. Support. They needed some
Support.
kind of support. Yeah.
to do this.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you think that they actually were trying to get those regions to rejoin Russia, or was it really that they just wanted to break away from the sort of like West-leaning Ukrainian government and do their own thing? Because I asked that because of the whole Euromaidan thing that happened in 2013, right, the year before. Where you had, as far as I recall, you're Ukrainian, so you'll know better. There was a president who was elected. I mean, it seemed that you guys had an election, and it was very close result, right, between the one who was more Russia friendly and the other one. It was a woman, right? The other one was a woman. The one who was more friendly towards the West. I forget if it was a woman who was...
Timoshenko.
I think, yeah.
Timoshenko. Okay, yes. And so they had this result. You had a president who was, I guess, elected by the people. And then you had the Euromaidan protests, riots. Some would say it was a coup, right? Because there was a lot of interference from the United States, right, during that whole thing. I mean, you had top government officials from the United States actually come and give speeches and so on right there, right, during this whole thing. And then you had this violent overthrow of what I guess is a democratically elected president. But it seemed that this Euromaidan thing erupted when the elected president decided that he didn't really want to go down the road of joining the EU. That seemed to be the thing that flamed the whole thing up, right? He wanted to play more in Russia's backyard rather than in the West's backyard, if I can put it like that. So I can understand if you look at the map, if you actually pull up a map of the vote, like the people who voted for what was his name? Yanukovych, yeah. If you look at the map of the people who voted for Yanukovych, they are all, it's practically all on the eastern side of Ukraine, right? Right against the Russian border. It's almost like 40, I think it's like 40% of the country towards the east is voting for Yanukovych. And then the further you go west, the more it becomes for the other candidate. the one who was more favorable towards the West. And so I can understand the people of Ukraine having won this vote, and then you have this violent protest, riot, coup thing happening with the West being involved, overthrowing the president who I chose. I wanted this president, and we won. Yay! Yeah, he's pro-Russian, and then he's thrown out like this, and then in his place is put a Western-friendly president or government. So I can understand how that 40% or that not the 40%, but the 50-something% who voted for Yanukovych, who are in the eastern part of Ukraine, I can understand that they would be pretty pissed off. I mean, what do you think about that? And it seemed to me that situation that happened in the Donbass was almost a result of basically those people feeling like, hey, that's cheating. You can't, like, we had this guy, we voted, we won. Yanukovych was our guy, we won, and then the West comes in and basically throws our guy out and puts their own friendly guy in, and the thing that happened in Donbass to me seemed like a big fuck you to the West. Like, hey, in that case, we're just gonna go and do our own thing. We're leaving Ukraine. But what you are saying in regards to people having been injected from Russia into that region, that's something new to me. I didn't know about that. I didn't hear about that. What did you think about the vote? Did you think the vote was legitimate? Did you think the Euromaidan? You're shaking your head.
Because people didn't choose Yanukovych like a president. You know, in Ukraine and Russia, something like illegal. we vote, but government choose president instead of citizen. You know.
Are you saying like corruption? Are you saying it was okay?
It's like I can't give any comments on what you said right now because in 2013 I was 15 years age, so like
okay.
Yeah. But what she's trying to say is that in our countries you can't fully rely on vote reports.
Sure.
Well, like
okay.
Biden got to power.
Okay.
Forgive ourselves.
But that's really a big problem, isn't it? If like, this is the problem for me. In Switzerland, I can have a high degree of faith and trust in the democratic process of elections, you know? But then I can understand in a country like Ukraine or even in Russia, I can understand the people saying, well, he won, but did he really win, right? But then the other question is, okay, if he didn't win, do you think it's justified to use, like what happened in Euromaidan? Do you think that that's the way to solve the problem? I mean, it was violent. It was
like at first Euromaidan started just like a meeting.
Yeah, sure. But the thing that actually threw Yanukovych out wasn't a meeting. It was literally guns and militias in the street, snipers on the roof. I remember watching this live. It was violent.
What snipers?
Like, I don't know. A lot of people suspected that these were outside forces, that these were like special ops from the United States or from NATO countries, because they were completely unidentifiable. And then you had, for example, the infamous Azov Brigade types right there, downtown Kiev. They were actually a very big part of the whole violence that overthrew the Yanukovych government. And yeah, it was...
Okay, so like, if you will go on all this theory thing and so on, like, there is also an opinion that yes, these snipers, they were put there by states, NATO, and so on, to just throw a match, a burning match to a like crowd, to this meeting, that people will think that, oh, Yanukovych is trying like to kill us, answering to our meeting, and all this stuff like just began.
Exactly. But I mean, I guess you don't approve of this being the solution to, you know, the question of did Yanukovych really win the election, or was there corruption involved, right? I mean, to solve that question, we shouldn't have snipers on the roof and gun battles in the streets of Kiev, I hope.
Yeah, like is it question to us or to someone who put snipers there?
Well, to you as Ukrainians, for starters, like you were saying, you were only 15 at the time that this happened, so I understand you had funner things to do than watch this happening. But now looking back on it, can you look back and say, you know, maybe Yanukovych didn't win the election because of corruption, but the way that he was thrown away, or the way that he was removed from power, was even worse. You don't know?
I don't understand the question.
It's kind of like we have two problems here, it seems to me. One is that there's corruption in the government in Ukraine. So the people, for example, when you elect someone, the result happens, yeah? Yanukovych wins, but then you have people who say, yeah, but we don't know. I mean, it's so corrupt. We don't know if he actually won, right? That's one problem. Then we have the second problem, and that is, okay, what do you do about the corruption, right? And the Euromaidan and what happened after that removed Yanukovych from power, is that worse than the first problem? The first problem is corruption, but the second problem is how you try to solve the corruption. And
yeah, like if there is a crowd of people who want to change the government, what they should do? Like, I mean that it was a peace meeting at the beginning. Like maybe couple years ago, have you been watching what was going on in Belarus? Like it also, people just were going to peace meetings, but they were beaten, they were like prisoned, killed, and so on. And Lukashenko got 82% vote. Like there's also a corruption, like in our countries.
Probably,
so,
yeah.
Like, what can you do if like you can do nothing? I would say so.
But do you think it would have maybe been better to let him remain president rather than do what they did? Or it's hard to say, huh?
I don't know.
Arthur, do you have any words of wisdom for us?
I'm just curious, but I don't think this is a question that any of us can answer. But maybe I'll say it anyways. If there's like what's a better, give me 1 second. In a case like this, where you do have regions that lean one way and other regions that lean a different way, and you can't rely on elections, is it better to do the Balkan thing without the war and actually just go in your separate directions? I don't know. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just curious. Or is it something where there is the possibility that something can instead unite everyone and bring them forward? Like what is the reality? Because you have to, I mean, obviously we're dealing in abstraction right now, but from a political perspective, if you're there, you have to figure out what really can we do with what we have right now.
Right. Wow.
So anyway, that like I said, I don't think we have an answer to it. That's just what's on my mind right now.
It's an interesting thought.
It reminds me of something Eman had said towards the start of the show. You had said that about like where you're trying to imply that certain countries may, in theory, have the right to to decide on what they align with politically, but realpolitik dictates otherwise. And you were saying how you feel like it's a strange concept because the sovereign people should be able to make their sovereign decisions over their sovereign whatevers. But the truth is that pretty much all the borders in the world were established by someone who had the power to do so. So it's not really a sovereign nation who sovereignly decided, and that ties into what Arthur said now. So it's like you have all these people in a place that someone decided to draw some lines and say, yeah, now this is a new country, call it Ukraine. So at the end of the day, it's kind of like, so why would they then, or just why would any sovereign peoples believe they have a right to, to be protected off of anything? In fact, at the end of the day, someone at some point in time decided what they were and what makes them sovereign. So I guess that's always been the conflict, right, with this fundamental right to self-determination that they love saying, and everyone has that fundamental right as long as it doesn't go against the Constitution, which says the country is defined by the borders that surround it. So yes, when it's all about this idea, let's say a very humanist idea, where like, oh, we're individuals, we're sovereign, and we make our decisions, and we want to be free, la-di-da. At the end of the day, it's like you only are a country because someone bigger and stronger than you decided to make you one,
and to
or allow you to be one, or for whatever reasons.
Yeah.
So then that idea of, because I've had this talk with other friends where they're like that. It's like, oh, but don't you believe every people should have the right to decide where they go? So it's like, even if I believe that they did or that they should, that would be a very unrealistic approach, first of all. And secondly, it would be ignoring the fact that someone or a group of nations pretty much drew up the map of the globe and what countries are. So why wouldn't they or shouldn't they be allowed to do it again if it resolves conflicts?
Yeah.
If you look at Yemen, for example, I don't know if I mentioned it last time on here. I've been having so many discussions on this, but it's like, if you pretty much look at it's almost like a Ukraine, similar kind of thing happened there, right? Where the Houthis pretty much ousted the former president, which was very Saudi Arabia friendly, and and now they're the enemy there. Whereas in Ukraine, when the more, I don't know if I should say right-wing government, but let's just say the ones that came to power through Euromaidan, through the coup there, and the president escaped in exile to Russia. Well, he was no longer recognized as president by the West. The West has a history of that throughout World War II. They just, even if it was completely unrealistic, we have the government in exile of France and the government in exile of Poland and the government in exile of every place. They pretty much decide which governments in exile they want to recognize and which not. But back to the Yemen thing, if you look at the actual conflict lines, you pretty much could draw almost identically a line along the border of what used to be North and South Yemen. So sometimes you say people drew lines, maybe we need to draw lines, that's just
well, what does Darya, Maksym and Alina think about that? What do you think about new lines being drawn in Ukraine?
That would be terrible. That would be terrible.
Can I pose an alternative? What about a neutral Ukraine? What would you guys think of a forcibly neutral Ukraine?
Could you explain one more time, please?
Yeah, like a neutral country is a country that is politically non-aligned with any other political identity or entity. So like, what would your guys, because it's something that was suggested by Kissinger already at the Euromaidan, when the conflict in Ukraine began, let's say, with the civil war in the east, as we see it. He had proposed making the country a neutral country, meaning you cannot belong to any other political entity. And now there's, let's say, a few more voices talking about. In the last show, I made a mistake. I always mix up Morgenthau with Mearsheimer. It was Mearsheimer. I think I said Morgenthau just to get correct. I always mix them up because they shared similar ideas on nuclear weapons. But the idea of Ukraine being a neutral country, that means forcibly. So again, it would not be the people choosing it. It would be like Austria after World War II was made forcibly a neutral country in order to sort of divide the Soviet forces from Western forces. And making Ukraine now neutral forcibly, unless the people were to have the right to choose and would choose it, would mean that they pretty much would never belong to the EU, they never belong to NATO. You also would not belong to Russia. And then you could actually start a new domestic and foreign policy that starts from there. Like Switzerland was pretty much made neutral 200 years ago, and by a stronger power, and since then, it's what we've had to work with. Now we've kind of thrown a bit of that out the window, sadly, but that's another topic. But I'm interested in knowing, like, if those things are even being discussed among Ukrainians by the government in Ukraine, or from the impression I get is the government in Ukraine is really just playing someone else's game. They are not behaving rationally nor realistically with the situation on the ground. So I'm wondering if this is even discussed among Ukrainians, the idea of just being neutral, not belonging to anybody.
I think that after this war, we can't be neutral.
Neutral.
You can. I mean, politically, I don't mean emotionally, but politically.
Like, for example, I think that we don't want to be a place for war between South and West. Yeah.
Yep.
That's why we need to be like friends with some of them to protect us.
But what about being friends with both and not having any as an enemy?
With both?
Yeah, with both.
It is impossible.
Yes,
I know that's
because
what
I
the
think
government
the whole
wants, yeah.
world are pushing us to entscheiden.
To decide.
For
Yeah.
one, to decide us for one side. I think, yeah.
But does that mean it's interesting for you just because the world's pushing you to do that?
Yeah.
So you're interested in joining NATO just because NATO really wants to have you? That's the question.
Yeah. Can you repeat it, please? Sorry.
Yeah, like just because NATO wants to have you, that means you feel you need to become part of it? Or is it because you really want to?
Like, before all this conflict, I didn't think of NATO like at all. Ukraine wanted to join the EU. Like, that was idea, like, and that was like my mindset and like my, I would say, wish or something like that. I didn't think about NATO at all. So like, I don't know.
Okay.
Interesting. So the politics or the government in Ukraine spoke about joining the EU, but they never really spoke about if you join the EU, then you will also need to join NATO. Is that?
Like, maybe it's a common thing and everybody understands that, but I didn't think it.
Okay.
It's interesting.
Kind of.
Yeah. And the idea of a neutral Ukraine is actually quite an interesting idea. I mean, neutrality, like Switzerland is supposed to be neutral, but now that we decided to go along with all the sanctions of the EU,
Except for one.
that's now neutrality not so much. So But neutrality is a difficult thing to maintain, for sure. You know, it takes people who are sure of themselves. It takes people who are, I would say, of strong character, strong values. You really have to believe in the idea of neutrality.
Yeah. Not easily swayed.
No. And that's the thing. To be neutral, like Vincent just said, you cannot allow yourself to be pressured from outside opinion and, you know, one force saying to you, shame on you for siding with the other guys, and the other guys saying shame on you for siding with the other guys, right? Because that's what they will do. Mm-hmm. They will try to use everything to knock you off the horse. And you have to be a good horse rider yourself. You have to be sure in the saddle, and you have to remain constant and firm in your conviction. And that's really not easy. A lot of people actually think about neutrality as this kind of weak position. You know, oh yeah, Switzerland, they don't want to decide anything. They just, you know, they want to have the best of all worlds. No, neutrality is actually a very difficult thing. And if it wasn't so difficult, I think you would see a lot more countries being, you know, having a neutral history. But it's an incredibly interesting thing to think about for Ukrainians, I think, because if you can pull off neutrality, well, I mean, Switzerland's done okay for itself, right? I mean, being neutral, we're doing okay in Switzerland.
I think so. Can't complain about too much.
No.
Except that the government decided on their own to get rid of our neutrality. That's a problem.
You know, these little things.
Yes. We'll deal with them later. Arthur, did you want to interject something?
I was just going to say, this is the issue, though, and I think this is a lesson that a lot of people need to take away with access to information, and particularly just actually understanding. Everyone wants democracy. Everyone wants a vote. Everyone wants to have a say. And, you know, I understand 100% why. And in some ways, I think that, I think everyone should. But every decision has its consequences. And of course, it's such a, you know, obvious thing to say, but it really is true. And in the world of geopolitics, which most people are not aware of, because we don't want to be, I mean, it's an entire other world. There are these constant battles. Like, so what you were saying earlier, Maksym, about people being inserted into the Donbass region, I wouldn't be surprised. If I wanted to tear apart Canada right now, I'd insert Green Berets into Alberta and into Quebec and start stoking, you know, separatist tension, because it's always going to be there. There will be people in areas that don't agree. I think Spain has its regions, France has its regions, if I'm not mistaken. There's a lot of places that do.
Yep.
But this also comes back to, so information is so important. People need to understand, and then people need to be made aware of what the consequences of those actions will be. So let's just say you do vote independence for someone, and the country goes, okay, that rather than us fight and kill each other over this, have at it, go for it. There might very quickly come a time where that little country decides, actually, you know what? I'd really rather be really close to you guys, because we're actually not that dissimilar from each other, and this is a big, scary world, and there are a lot of powers out there, and actually maybe it's not such a great idea. My point being, in all of this, in neutrality was an option, or should have been an option, let's say, given to the people of Ukraine. It really should have been. The fact that was not made very, very clear is very sad, because in the end, that's the last thing you want, is to get caught between. I mean, and I say this, and it sounds callous, and I don't mean to sound callous at all. I mean, you guys are going through something that is, you know, it's horrific, but being caught between the West and Russia at any point in a conflict is not cool.
Yeah.
And the reason why it's so frustrating is because I also know my half my family's Finnish, and I know at the same time as Ukraine was discussing NATO, Finland has been discussing being a part of NATO as well, on the border of Russia. So I know this is not just coincidence. This is not just, hey, two bordering countries just decided one day they both are thinking about being part of NATO. So there's stuff going on behind the scenes that we're obviously not seeing. And don't think for a second. I love the West. I want the West to do well, but don't think for a second that they're doing these things because they want the best interest for Finland or for Ukraine or for any of these places. Like this is self-interest, and not even national self-interest. That this might even be further, what do you call it? Atomized self-interests in powerful positions. So,
Wow. Oof. I thought last one was gonna be
Yeah.
long. Guys,
There's so much that we could go on for so much longer.
I know.
Honestly.
Got to about 2 points on the list.
You had a list. I had a list too.
Well, the list has just been like things that came to me, like things like the casualty disparity that we didn't even touch on.
Oh,
Stuff
yeah.
like that, where you're just like, there's no way to work with anything here. But yeah, or more details, kind of like people are always like, oh well, what's wrong with joining NATO, and you know, and the reality of nukes in Ukraine, like, oh, but what if we just wouldn't put nukes in Ukraine? Well, you know, maybe you just would, you know. Yeah, but those are a lot of topics there. The whole non-proliferation treaty and all these kind of things. So.
Can I ask one question though, if anyone feels like answering, and we don't have to touch on this now, but I'd be really curious to what everyone thinks is the way forward, because this is the other thing. It's great to talk about, oh, this could have been avoided. We could have done things better that way. In the past, things could have been this way, but now you're in it. Right now, this is where we are. What now? And maybe we're not qualified to talk about that. I don't know, but.
Everyone's qualified to talk about anything they feel like.
Yeah.
But I'd say I'd love to hear it first from our Ukrainian guests.
Same.
You have to use the other browser window.
The question was what, like, possible solutions to what's happening right now.
That's the one.
Yeah. What do you think can realistically be done to solve this, to end the conflict, to move forward?
Do you understand it, Darya, or should I say in German?
Oh, you're muted.
You're muted.
You can say it in German if you want to.
Nein, es war nur, ob jemand irgendwie irgendwelche Ideen hat, wie man die jetzige Konflikt, also das, was jetzt abläuft, wie man das eigentlich zu lösen gibt. Also hat jemand Ideen, dass wir nur darüber diskutieren, aber gibt es irgendwelche, was wir als realistische Lösungen sehen, nicht utopianische, mehr so jetzt.
Ja, die optimalste Lösung wäre es, Putin zu stürzen.
Okay. All right.
But I think it's not the really realistic opinion. So yeah.
For our English viewers, Putin stürzen. What degree are we talking here?
Government.
Okay,
Let's keep it safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she suggested.
Although,
as a possible solution. But she did also admit that it's probably not so realistic.
Yeah.
Right?
From Maksym and Alina.
I really don't know what needs to happen to stop war, but I think that we will win, and it's like normal. And I think that we will rebuild our country very quickly. That I don't know. I hope, because I think positively and I believe in my nation. You know.
Like, if there is a war in your country, so you don't want to think about other outcomes than victory. So, like, but truly speaking, like right now, I don't see clearly what are the conditions of victory. Like, uh, what should be to like say that okay, we won. Like, truly speaking, I
Yeah.
don't understand like how. And for example, like Kenban mentioned, I think you're trying to find a map how it looks like right now.
These are the latest maps that I've been able to find from
Okay,
various
I
sources.
should recommend you. There is a guy Nathan Ruser on Twitter. You'll find or something else. Like he has the like closest map on how it looks right now, because right now they didn't took any cities or any like big parts of Ukraine. So like in Russia they show this. They just took main roads. Like cities are like free right now.
Yeah,
Like-
yeah.
Like that, but without this like red squares and
Red
so on.
regions.
Just the roads. So
I've seen those maps, and I've seen the commentary on those maps, and they don't make a whole lot of sense to me. I have to be honest about that, because it's kind of like it goes back to what I saw happening in the Libyan crisis and in the Syrian crisis. So for example, if we look at this map and we see these huge red areas, right? It's not the case that the Russians have like a soldier every, I don't know, 10 meters, right? Over this red area. It's not like they have you know what I mean? Like a grid of soldiers every 10 meters, right? It's the idea of this kind of visualization of the conflict is to show how far inland the forces, in this case of Russia, have progressed into the country. Of course, they're not like standing, every 10 meters and saying, yes, I'm still here, got it, and then the next guy and the next guy, right? So those maps that show like, and I'm comparing previous war maps. For example, what happened in Afghanistan with the United States and Britain and France in there, and what happened in Iraq and so on. None of them depicted or showed their maps with just the roads being taken. It's never shown like that. So I saw these maps of Ukraine with just the roads colored red, like with the Russian advance, and I thought that's kind of silly. I mean, if you know what I mean, I don't know.
Well, I think it's more it shows where they can exert active control. At the moment, I guess
Right.
that's what it is.
Yeah.
So it is true that they have purposely not gone into most cities, at least bigger cities yet, because they're trying to, let's say, minimize civilian casualties. So that's the main reason that they haven't gone in. They're hoping to let's say maybe reach their aims before having to do that.
Yeah.
But I was on what Maksym said before about victory, and then you even managed to say you don't know what victory necessarily would look like.
Mm-hmm.
Did I understand that right?
Yeah.
I would suggest that one possible definition for victory would mean losing as few citizens as possible. And that doesn't tie in very well with a prolonged military conflict or any at all. So sometimes that can be a win as a country, where you say at the end of the day, what makes up a country is the citizens. The loss of citizens means theoretically a loss of country. So to minimize the loss is what one could consider a victory, just from one viewpoint. Something to consider.
What was the original question? I forget.
My question?
Yes. How do you see this end? Where
do
to
we
now?
go from here? Or where does this
Possible solution?
right?
Oof.
Yeah.
That's a tough one, eh?
Is this our
Maybe this
wrap-up
is our
question?
wrap-up.
That's a fun one. Well, I think what Marc said is definitely something that I can agree with. Obviously, I don't think that there's a solution to this where everyone walks away happy. I mean, as it is already, it's already gone way too far. So at this point, victory, I don't know if you can define that exactly. I think the only way that any form of traditional victory would happen is if Russia just simply backed off and went back. I don't think that will happen, though. I highly doubt it. But at this point, it's minimizing damage, minimizing loss of life, and minimizing also international fallout. How that happens, I wouldn't know. Hopefully, diplomatically.
One thing I think that I'd be curious to know a little bit more about, actually, is Russia recently had something similar happen in Georgia, correct? Mark, you probably know this better than I do.
I mean, okay, I guess someone could say similar, similar-ish, but I believe at that time it was widely accepted that that was actually instigated by Georgia, that wanted to try to get a little piece of another region.
Okay.
But it was similar. It was similar in the sense that the natives there were predominantly more Russian.
What I'm kind of getting at with that is someone had made the comparison that what Russia did there, they went in, they got their objective, and they left. Is that correct? Was that a correct statement as far as you're aware?
I mean that they left. Yeah, I mean they're definitely not in Georgia. Let's say South Ossetia is let's say not part of Georgia.
Okay.
So they did reach their objectives. So leaving, I guess, in the sense of if they had to cross into Georgian territory, they're no longer on it.
Where I'm kind of driving at is maybe one definition of victory for Ukraine, or of successful resolution, maybe is a better way of saying this, is coming to a solution where Russia can withdraw its troops in the way that it did with Georgia, having achieved it. Let's say it means, again, I'm not saying this needs to be the way, but if they've done it before, there has to be a way to come to some solution where maybe the West says, we'll agree to you that Ukraine stays neutral. You withdraw troops from Ukraine. The Donbass region gets its way if that's what it wants, and we all move on with our lives. Of course, in an ideal world, I guess well, for some, I guess we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, I guess in a reality that we don't seem to be in. One would think that the government of Ukraine would have the interests of its people at the forefront of any decision they are looking at taking. And weighing out all the options, if they continue to fight against Russia, honestly, it's just a matter of time. They themselves even say this. It's just a matter of time. But then it goes back to what we discussed earlier about external influences, foreign influences from the West, sort of egging on the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian people. Hang in there. Somehow we're going to find you a back door to get out of this mess. Promises. And the only thing that the West can really do is promise. It's either promise or it's World War III.
If they fast track Ukraine into the UN and NATO.
Not even that. I mean, that's why if you look at what's happening, for example, with the whole fighter jet discussion, right? They're like, one day Poland is saying, we'll let you use one of our airfields to fly missions out over Ukraine, but we're not giving you pilots, right? So, but then it seems like they went back on even the airfield thing because they realized if we are allowing, foreign fighter jets to leave from Poland, then that is basically us militarily aiding Ukraine. It's an act of war.
The gun shot the bullet, not me.
The bullet killed him, not the gun.
Yeah.
Right? And this is the thing you see in the West. You see the discussions happening in the UN and so on and so on. And they all get up and applaud, give a big clap and so on. But they don't promise any hardware. They don't promise anything that's going to mean much to the Ukrainian defense of Ukraine. Mm. So in the end, one has to be realistic about these things. Like I said, it's either they give promises, or it's World War III, or they're going up against Russia. Mm. And that's the reality. And in that reality, there's more. There's other options. But for some reason, like has been said before, those other options are not being tabled. The options of Ukrainian neutrality, for example. That is a real option, and it's not being given any serious thought. Where's the media? Where's the diplomats talking about, hey, why can't Ukraine be neutral? Why can't Ukraine be friends with both the East and the West? It's certainly been done before. And this is, again, one of those things like we talked about before, that it seems like there is an effort being made by certain geopolitical powers to keep this conflict running and to keep it escalating.
Yeah.
Because common sense, which we common people have plenty of, says that there are other options. Mm-hmm. And one has to really ask themselves, why is the Ukrainian government not bringing forward these other options? If they mean the best for their people, for their country, why don't they bring up these other options? And if the West means the best for Ukraine, why aren't they bringing up these options? So that's... Yeah.
I would almost put it more on the West in this case as well, because Ukraine is in the middle of a war.
Mm-hmm.
That can be, obviously as a government, you're supposed to be able to handle that, but that obviously it's a big deal. But from the perspective of the West, if you look at this from the possible outcomes, and those are the three outcomes, you have World War III, you have this continues till it's just unnecessarily harmful to everybody, or we come to a diplomatic solution. You have to be looking for a win-win-win diplomatic solution where Ukraine gets to keep some pride, Russian troops go home, and everyone gets the agreements they wanted already in the beginning. Granted, nothing is ever perfect. I don't see us ever getting a perfect solution like that, but you have to at least hope that someone somewhere is looking for something like that in this case, because that really, from my limited perspective, would be the optimal solution. Now that we are where we are. Granted, it could have been stopped years ago, could have been stopped a year ago.
Yeah.
But now we're here.
And I'm so disappointed. I have to say, I'm so disappointed in Switzerland. Beyond words, I'm disappointed, because Switzerland has always been this archetypal. I just made up a word. No, I think it's archetype. Sort of the symbol of neutrality, where conflicting powers in the world can meet and talk and find agreement, sort out their differences. Let's get Putin and what's his name, Zelensky.
Zelensky.
Let's get them both in a
room,
paintball match or something, and have them sort out their differences. No, but I've been so put off by the way that Switzerland has handled this, just going along with the whole Western bagging out of one side and making it all seem like there is no nuance, there's no valid points that come from Russia, and completely seem to have trampled all over the idea of diplomacy and neutrality in this matter. And I mean, they've stopped short of, oh, maybe we can send them some weapons. It's like, great, but you know. So I'm really disappointed in. I would have hoped that in a situation like this, Switzerland would have risen to the challenge and said, hey, this is our job. This is what we're here for. We're gonna get you guys to sit together and come to some agreements. But nothing. I haven't heard a single thing from the Swiss federal government regarding doing any of that. And yeah, so poo Switzerland.
That's a good point. We're gonna have to wrap up soon. Do any of you have anything that you'd like to promote? Something you're working on, something you think could be of interest or important for people to know?
I'll say something. No, I as I said, I think my main concern is really that the Ukrainian government is. I'm just hoping that they will not purposely prolong this crisis in order to minimize the loss of life, and people need to really stop romanticizing the idea of being killed by a bullet. It's really not that romantic. And you know, obviously, whoever they're listening to, they need to maybe think about not listening to any longer, because they obviously show no desire to negotiate seriously, which is very similar to what we saw from Europe and the United States over the last few months, where it's all like, let's negotiate, and negotiating means, okay, let's just, you know, reinforce, reorganize, get our weapons again. And delivering humanitarian aid inevitably then becomes delivering weapon supplies and food to warring parties, which then means the civilian population that decides not to leave might end up suffering anyways, because obviously you're going to first feed your soldiers if you're fighting a war. That's just the way it works. So yeah, I'm hoping that, I'd say in this moment, they are definitely, I'd say the onus is on them, simply because I think we know Russia's position very clearly. We know their demands very clearly. And from there, I think if the Ukrainians don't realize that by now that Russia is serious about their concerns, then they might risk going through a whole lot more suffering in the future. That's my concern.
And I would add to that, anyone making comparisons, because I know that either this will or has come up, to of Russian aggression to Hitler in World War II, we are in a different world entirely. Maybe they could have stopped Hitler earlier. That's an entire other conversation. But Hitler didn't have nukes, and as much as that's a shame. Not that Hitler didn't have nukes.
I was gonna say
wording.
Oops.
It's not a case where you can stand up and say, okay, I'm going to be Churchill and I'm going to say no and I'm going to go and fight. It's just, we're just not in that world right now. At least I hope we're not in that world right now. So, and the consequences would be very, very different, as horrible as those consequences were.
Our Ukrainian representatives, is there anything that you'd like to say?
Ukrainian delegation.
I just hope that the war will end as soon as possible.
Absolutely.
Yes, we're begging that our families will be fine, and the people who's there and yes, fighting for their lives. So yeah, we
Mhm.
all hope it will end soon.
Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, for me, I mean, definitely everything you guys said. We really do hope that this ends in the most amicable way, peaceful way possible. Um, Also, I wanted to mention quickly. Uh, we have family in Russia, and they've given us sort of detailed reports of how it is for them in Russia, and I'm sure we've seen. Um, there are easier ways to do that. There are much better ways to do that. Yeah, so they've reported, and I'm sure you've all heard of the protests going on in Russia, and I think it's also important for us to see from the Russian side, like what they're going through right now, and keep them in our thoughts, as well as the Ukrainian people. Like last week, I do want to point to the link in the description where people who want to share their support can donate to the Red Cross to support Ukrainian people in need right now. Yeah.
Yeah, my closing thoughts. Over the last week, I have, of course, paid a lot of attention to all the propaganda, um, from the west to the east, and also, yeah, on Twitter, on Telegram, watching the footage, the videos, the photographs, from people in Ukraine, um, people in Moscow, seeing what the police are doing in Moscow. Some of it's pretty extreme. Some of it actually looks very similar to what's been going on in the West. Basically, the only thing about the way that the police are handling themselves in Moscow, which is different from what I've seen and experienced myself in the West, is earlier today there was a journalist in Moscow who noticed the police in full riot gear, walking around Moscow in various areas, and they were stopping people seemingly randomly and asking to see their phones and, yeah, reading their messages. No one knows exactly what they were looking for. The journalist asked a couple times, what are they doing? What authority they have to do what they're doing? She didn't really get anywhere. They just, go away, you pesky journalist. But yeah, she uploaded quite a few videos of this happening, and that's quite a shocking thing to see. That in Moscow you can be walking down the street and the police will stop you and say, "Give me your phone, unlock it," and they just start going through your apps, looking at your photos. She said she even saw, in one case, the police were looking through a phone of a young woman and found her nude photographs, and that the police officer spent some time looking at them. So that is a huge invasion of privacy and personal rights and freedoms. So that's something that I see happening in Moscow, which I know a lot of people in Moscow will be very angry about, upset about. And it seems counterintuitive, counterproductive to me to see that being done by the Russian police. On the other hand, I would say that they probably think they are so, or the forces behind them that are giving them these orders probably think they are so invincible that they can basically just do whatever they want. But some of the other coverage I've been following, and this has really struck me, is that when I look at the coverage of the Donbas region, and then I look at the coverage of people in Kharkiv, I think I'm saying it right, and of the other Ukrainian cities where, you know, Russian shells are falling. Ukrainians are losing their lives due to the conflict, due to Russians, right, killing them. And what's happening in the Donbas is horrific as well. And you listen to both of these sides, and there is so much grief. There is so much anger, frustration. It's like it's just building up and building up and building up with every single bullet that's fired, every single missile that's fired. It's just another casualty and another example of hate and grief, and why are they doing this to us, right? And both sides are saying this. And when I watch that happening on both sides, I can see that this is not something that is going to be easily fixed. It's going to take more than politics, I think, to really fix this.
There's a lot of personal damage.
Yes, you know, mothers and fathers, parents who have lost their children on both sides, right? Children who have lost their parents on both sides, right? This stuff's happening across the board. And the healing is, I don't think it's going to be political. The real healing. Yes, they may come up with another agreement. The politicians will sit down, scribble something on a piece of paper for another 5-10 years. But the actual hurt is on a personal level. It's with the citizens. And if the people themselves cannot find the possibility to come together, then the politics doesn't really matter at the end of the day, because you will always end up later on with that anger and grief coming again to the top, and you will have another conflict. This is, I think, for me, what is I like to think about things at the core. Yeah, what is really at the core of things. And to me, when I see this, I see that the core problem is that the people themselves have so much to fight about, but they also have a lot to agree about. They have a lot to come together about. And it's up to them to really choose what they want to do. Do they want to keep the anger and frustration, or do they want to heal? I think they can heal. But it's going to take people, I think it's going to take people who are Ukrainians, who are Russians. And I know there are differences also between Ukrainians and Russians. There are lots of other different ethnicities there. But people from the region who say, hey guys, we are being used by political powers to do things to one another that hurt all of us. You understand where I'm coming from? And if we as just normal human beings, we don't want to fight, we don't want to kill each other. In a way, if you decide as a people, then you can make the politics not matter. And that's what I think could possibly happen in Ukraine. It's maybe a romantic idea, but if the people come together, and I've seen this in some of the videos, which was very cool, both the Russians having Ukrainian prisoners of war, and then Ukrainians having Russian prisoners of war. And I mean, you see how they treat one another. I mean, at least that's what we see. That's the part that we see. So we always have to keep that in mind. Maybe we don't see the other stuff that goes on. But from the stuff that we see, we can see Ukrainians with Russians, both military people, and yet they're not wringing each other's necks out.
Neither of them want to be there.
Yeah, neither of them want to be there.
Yeah.
So I really hope that the Ukrainian and Russian people in the area of Ukraine can come together and heal these wounds that are so sore over so many years. That's what I really hope happens there.
Definitely.
Well,
you guys have all been absolutely fantastic. This one went on significantly longer than we planned for, but you guys are absolute champions. Stuck with us. And yeah, I think we broke another record here. Again. In more ways than one.
We got to stop doing that.
I think if we continue to break records, this is not going to be a podcast anymore. This is going to be...
It's just going to be a never-ending discussion.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us on this episode. And thank you for your time. Thank you for your comments, your opinions, your views. It's amazing having ordinary people discussing these things together. That's what Branch Out is for. Our motto is everyday topics by everyday people. That's what we want to do. So thank you very much for joining us in this little part of the journey.
Thank you too.
Thank you. It was really interesting to hear your opinions from different countries, even from Canada. About our situation in Ukraine.
I would rather say not just in Ukraine, but like at all.
Yeah, overall.
This includes everything.
Well, we really also wish your family in Ukraine and, that part of the world, we really hope that they are safe, that they stay safe, and we really wish you all the best.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It was great meeting you all.
Yes,
you guys too.
Great.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, for everyone that stuck with us until this point, thank you for watching.
What's wrong with you?
Have you got better things to do? As usual, you can find us on virtually every social media platform. All the links are in the description. And we'd love to hear your feedback I'm sure there are some things you could comment on in these almost 4 hours. Whether you agreed with us or disagreed with us, we'd love to hear it. And until next time.
Yep. Take care, everyone.
Bye, guys. Have a good night.
Bye.
Ciao, ciao. Tschüss.